Pause whatever you think you know about personal growth. Silence the inner checklist that says, I should be more confident. I need better habits. I have to become successful. Because this isn't about adding anything to yourself. This is about removing everything that was never you to begin with. This experience is not for the casual viewer. This is for those who are ready to press delete on everything inherited, conditioned, and absorbed from a world that trained you to survive, but not to thrive as your truest self. Over the next 4 hours, you're not going to be motivated, you're going to be reconstructed. What we're exploring isn't mindset. It's not about thinking positive. It's not even about healing in the conventional sense. It's about breaking the entire framework of identity you've lived inside and replacing it with one that's architected consciously, with precision. You will learn how every belief you hold is a frequency, how your identity is a broadcast signal, and how the world you experience is nothing more than the echo of your self-image bouncing off reality's walls. You'll see how 95% of your thoughts aren't yours. They're echoes of inherited fears, roles, and trauma, and you'll finally have the tools to clear them. Across 40 tightly woven chapters, this isn't just theory. You will experience identity collapse, recalibration, frequency alignment, and legacy-level integration. From inner child to future self. From trauma templates to timeline convergence. From the shadow to the superconscious. By the end of this video, you won't just understand who you are. You will become the person your current identity could never even visualize. But to begin that process, we have to ask one question that will shake the foundations of your certainty. Who are you really? Let's start the process. Take a deep breath. This is where things start to unravel. The version of you that you wake up as each morning, that voice in your head, those preferences, that personality, those habits, it feels so permanent, doesn't it? Feels like you, unchanging, defined, familiar, but the truth is uncomfortable. You are not the you think you are. You are the product of repetition. Every fear you carry, every quirk you claim, even your deepest desires, they've been conditioned into you, like software downloaded before you even had a firewall. Think about it. You didn't choose your name. You didn't select the language your inner monologue speaks in. You didn't create your earliest definitions of love, success, power, or pain. Those were absorbed before you even knew how to question. You were absorbing information from your environment before your brain could distinguish between imagination and reality. Everything you heard, everything you saw, it got stamped into your subconscious like an invisible contract. This is who I am. This is how life works. This is what's possible. Over time, the repetition made it real. Your personality, your beliefs, your emotional triggers, they became the mask you forgot you were wearing. Let's call this the story loop. A loop formed by reinforced identity, replayed through habits, relationships, decisions, and self-talk. The loop feeds the self, and the self feeds the loop. But here's the first revelation. You are not the loop. You are not the voice in your head. You are the field in which that voice echoes. You are not the roles you play, you are the awareness beneath the role. You are not the habits you formed, you are the chooser, the architect, the origin point before any pattern was learned. When you understand this, you stop trying to upgrade the loop and start stepping outside it. This is where we enter the quantum identity model. This model isn't psychological. It's vibrational. It treats your sense of self not as a collection of traits, but as a frequency pattern, a signal your entire body and energy field broadcasts into reality. And like all signals, it gets picked up and mirrored back. The job, then, is not to work harder. It's to change the broadcast. And you can't change what you haven't questioned. So here's a question that might sting. What part of your identity are you defending just because it's familiar, not because it's true? Do you call yourself anxious? Or shy? Or a procrastinator? Do you say, I'm the kind of person who doesn't like risk? I'm the kind of person who needs stability? I'm the kind of person who always sabotages? Stop right there. That's not who you are. That's just who you've been repeating. That's not identity. That's muscle memory. Identity is not formed by choice, it is formed by exposure. But here's the breakthrough. Once exposed, it can be rewired. Once you can see the loop, you are no longer imprisoned by it. you begin to ask a new kind of question. Not who am I, but rather, who would I be without this story? It's uncomfortable at first. It's supposed to be. You're interrupting a lifetime of psychological and emotional programming. But the discomfort is the key. It means something is cracking. And that crack is sacred. Because through that crack, your real self begins to whisper. This real self isn't interested in proving, defending, justifying, or performing. It doesn't say, I'm this way because I've always been this way. It doesn't cling to labels. It doesn't need the past to validate the present. It simply exists, free, conscious, adaptive, powerful. It's this version of you, the unconditioned, untrained version that we're here to restore. And the way to restore it is by seeing the layers that were placed on top. The masks, the false personas, the protective identities that served you once, but now keep you stuck. So the next time you say, that's just how I am, pause. That phrase is usually the prison gate. When you say it and feel the need to defend it, that's the old loop fighting for survival. Don't fight back. Just notice. Because you're about to learn something that changes everything. Your identity isn't fixed. It's projected. And once you learn how that projection works, you can redirect it toward any reality you choose. Next, we will pull back the curtain on the illusion itself and explore how your current sense of self is not located inside of you, but around you. A holographic echo of your inner signal. The truth behind that projection is stranger and more liberating than anything you've ever believed. You've now questioned the version of you that felt so certain, so permanent, so normal, and in its place, something much more interesting is starting to emerge. What you used to call you wasn't solid. It wasn't even internal. It was a signal, a projection, a repeating frequency you thought was your essence. But now it's time to understand something far more radical. Your identity is not a statue carved in stone. It's a hologram, a 3D projection of belief, memory, and frequency, cast outward into your life like light through a prism. Let's decode that. A hologram is an image that appears solid. You can see it, walk around it, observe it from multiple angles. But it isn't made of physical parts. It's made of light, interference patterns, data encoded in frequency. And from that invisible frequency, a visible illusion appears. That's exactly what your identity is doing right now. Your behaviors, your tone of voice, the way you respond in conversations, even your posture. These are not raw truths. These are just the outward manifestation of your inner pattern, the projection of your internal encoding. In other words, you're not being yourself. You're performing the version of yourself that your frequency allows. This is not metaphorical. This is literal. Your thoughts emit a field. Your emotions radiate a measurable signal. Your subconscious conditioning organizes your behavior into predictable, repeatable patterns. And those patterns are like data inside a holographic projection system. Every person you meet, every opportunity or lack of opportunity, every repeating situation, it's all being filtered through the lens of that projection. This is why two people with the same skills, same intelligence, and same goals can live in completely different realities. One moves in alignment with their designed projection. The other is trapped in an outdated broadcast loop. The key difference isn't luck. It's identity frequency. So here's a question to consider deeply. What frequency is your current self broadcasting right now? Is it set to fear or power? Scarcity or creativity? Reaction or choice? You don't need to guess. You can look at the world around you. Your relationships, your career, your emotional patterns, these are reflections of the projection. The problem is, most people try to change their outer world without adjusting the inner projector. They go after results, outcomes, and goals, without tuning the frequency that determines them. It's like trying to fix the image on the wall by scratching at the surface, when the projector is what's flawed. So here's the breakthrough. You must stop reacting to the hologram and start reprogramming the projector. Your identity is not the real thing. It's the outer image, the simulation. When you understand this, you stop trying to force change through hustle and start transmitting change through frequency. Because when you shift the signal, reality reshapes to match it. There's a reason this sounds futuristic, because it is. It's quantum, it's energetic, and it's where the future of transformation is headed. The body you're in, the thoughts you think, the choices you make, all of them are guided by the default settings of your current frequency. Now, this is where it gets important. If your current identity is a projection, then by definition you can project something else. But not through willpower, not by repeating empty affirmations, not by faking it. You can only project something new by going back to the coding system and shifting the frequency at its root. So how do you do that? You begin by noticing the false solidity of the self. The places where you say, "That's just who I am." The reactions you assume are automatic. The patterns that feel too consistent to question. Each of those is a holographic loop, stabilized not by truth but by belief. And belief is changeable. You stop feeding it your attention, and it begins to dissolve. You start feeding a different possibility, and it begins to crystallize. But before you can do that effectively, you need to study the mirror that shows you what's being projected. And that mirror is your entire reality. Next, we will move closer to the reflection, examining how every detail in your current life, even the uncomfortable ones, are nothing more than identity echoes. The hologram doesn't just live in your mind. It lives in your environment, your habits, your repeated situations. And once you understand how to decode that mirror, you'll never be confused about why things happen the way they do again. Now that you've seen your identity for what it is, a holographic projection, it's time to examine the reflection it creates. Because the world around you isn't reacting to your goals, your intelligence, or your effort. It's reacting to your identity frequency. This frequency isn't mystical. It's magnetic. It's precise. It's the energetic code embedded in every micro-choice, every emotion, every behavior. And like a mirror, your external world reflects that exact pattern, over and over again. Let's break this down. You wake up in the morning. Immediately, without thinking, you reach for your phone. You check messages. You read the news. Your heart rate spikes. You feel slightly behind already. What just happened? Your identity frequency, the unconscious blueprint of your personality, activated, performed its pattern, and that pattern influenced how your day would unfold. Now scale that up across your entire life. Relationships, income, confidence, reactions under stress. Each of them mirrors the frequency you've been trained to hold. You think it's random. It's not. It's resonance. Everything in your life that keeps repeating. Every argument, delay, sabotage, emotional trigger. It's not proof of bad luck. It's a mirror showing you the broadcast of your identity. And here's where most people go wrong. They look at the mirror and try to change the reflection. They try to fix the people, the job, the external situation. They try to shift the outcome without addressing the input. But the mirror doesn't lie. It doesn't change until you do. This is the quantum mirror principle. The outside reflects the inside. Always, without exception. You attract what you believe you are. If your identity says, "I'm unworthy," your reality organizes to validate that story. If your identity says, "I'm not ready," you'll always find proof that now isn't the right time. If your identity says, "I'm the kind of person who always has to struggle," your life will deliver obstacles with machine-like precision. The good news? You can reverse engineer this. You can use the mirror to reveal your identity frequency and then consciously upgrade the internal code. Here's how. Start by tracking patterns, not random events. Patterns. What keeps repeating in your relationships? What emotions do you return to even when life is going well? What's your default story when things go wrong? These aren't surface-level quirks. They are identity loops being reflected back at you. Your external world is the printout of your internal programming. When you shift the program, the printout changes effortlessly. This is not about controlling outcomes. This is about becoming the type of person who naturally attracts new outcomes through coherence. Coherence means alignment. It means your beliefs, emotions, thoughts, and behaviors are playing the same frequency. No static. No sabotage. When you reach coherence, the mirror doesn't resist you anymore. It reflects something new fast. The shift is often so instant, people think it's magic. It's not. It's physics. Now here's the trap. Once you start upgrading your identity, the mirror might not shift immediately. And this is where most people relapse. They look at the unchanged reflection and assume their inner work didn't work. But remember, mirrors don't change first. They change second. You are the one who must shift first, consistently, before the environment responds. Hold the frequency before the reflection appears. That's the discipline. That's the real transformation. So from this moment forward, treat everything in your reality as feedback. If someone disrespects your boundary, it's a mirror. If your income plateaus, it's a mirror. If you keep getting overlooked, it's a mirror. Don't resent the mirror. Study it, because every reflection is telling you exactly what to upgrade in your signal. And once you learn to read it, really read it, you become unshakable. Next, we will uncover why your current identity was never a conscious choice, and how most people are walking around reacting from programming they didn't even install themselves. It's time to question who wrote your code, and more importantly, who gave them permission to define you. You've now looked into the mirror and begun decoding what's being reflected back at you. You're starting to notice the patterns, not random, not accidental, but exact echoes of a deeper identity signal. But there's a problem most never detect. A trap so normalized it blends into the background of your life. You think you're making choices, but most of those choices are preloaded responses. And those responses are not consciously designed. They're default. This chapter is about one brutal truth. You are running on auto-you. Let's break it down. The mind is a pattern recognition machine. Craves efficiency. The brain is wired to reduce effort wherever possible. So it automates. It memorizes. It loops. Every time you respond to a situation, your subconscious checks for a previous match and fires the same neural circuit. This saves energy. But over time, it becomes your identity. The result? You're not choosing to be anxious. You're remembering how to be anxious. You're not deciding to procrastinate. You're repeating the sensation of avoidance. You're not being yourself. You're running your default script. That script is a stitched-together set of memories, emotional reactions, parental messages, cultural norms, coping mechanisms, and childhood rules, all installed before you were even aware enough to question them. Think of it like this. You were born with a blank operating system. Then, slowly, bit by bit, it was filled with code. Don't talk too loud. Don't make mistakes. Success means struggle. Love must be earned. Play it safe. Be liked. Stay small. These were not logical conclusions. They were survival strategies. And that's the key. Your current identity is a survival identity. It's not optimized for joy, power, or expansion. It's optimized to avoid rejection, loss, shame, or failure. Auto-you is not here to make your dreams come true. It's here to keep you alive, even if that means staying stuck in mediocrity. And here's how it works. Each time you reinforce a behavior that matches your survival identity, the brain strengthens that circuit. The nervous system gets more efficient at running that emotion. The body gets more familiar with that sensation. And it all starts to feel normal. Eventually, it stops feeling like behavior and starts feeling like you. But let's call it what it really is, a habit of being. That's all identity is, a sustained habit of being. So here's the question that wakes people up. Who trained you to be who you are? Because if it wasn't a conscious decision, it was an unconscious inheritance. Every time you reacted like your parents, the script got deeper. Every time you accepted limitation, the loop got tighter. Every time you repeated the phrase, "I'm just not that kind of person," the default settings got harder to override. But they are not permanent. They are programmable. Here's where we flip the paradigm. If your current identity is a default, you can replace it with a designed identity. And designed identity is radically different. It doesn't arise from fear. It doesn't repeat inherited stories. It begins with conscious choice. Designed identity asks a simple question. If I wasn't trying to stay safe, who would I choose to be? Let that question sit in your body for a second. Not the identity that pleases people. Not the identity that feels achievable. The identity that resonates with your highest internal truth. That version of you already exists, but it doesn't show up through thought alone. It shows up when you stop reacting as auto-you. The next time you feel the urge to shrink, to delay, to say yes when you mean no, pause. That's not you. That's the default. And each pause is a micro-interruption of the old loop. That interruption is the crack through which the design self begins to emerge. You don't need to change your entire life today. You just need to begin interrupting the old identity. Every interruption is a new signal, and repeated signal becomes the new normal. Designed identity is not about perfection. It's about coherence with your true intent. So who do you become when you no longer have to be who they needed you to be? Who do you become when safety is no longer your operating system? That's the real you. And now that you've seen how the default was installed, you're ready to trace it even deeper. Because the identity you call mine might not be yours at all. Next, we will walk into the origins, the early architecture, where the first builders of your personality handed you scripts before you could even speak. It's time to meet the authors of your original programming and start rewriting the code they left behind. You've just seen how your current self has been running on default settings. You've started to interrupt the automatic scripts. And now, the signal of a new self is breaking through the surface. But to fully reprogram, you need to know where the old programming came from. Because until you understand who handed you your identity, you'll unconsciously keep serving their version of reality. This chapter is about truth. Not blame. Not victimhood. Just raw, illuminating truth. Much of what you believe about yourself was never yours to begin with. It was inherited, passed down like invisible DNA. Not through genetics, but through conditioning. Let's start with the obvious. Your parents, caregivers, or early influences shaped your sense of self before you had language. Their emotional patterns became your emotional blueprint. Their fears became your inherited compass. Their praise and punishment taught you what to express and what to suppress. If they were anxious, you likely learned hypervigilance. If they were critical, you learned performance. If they were absent, you learned invisibility. But here's the twist. They didn't do it with intention. They were just passing down their own scripts. So the pattern repeats until someone wakes up and chooses not to carry it forward. That someone is you. Your inherited identity also came from culture. You absorbed rules before you knew they were optional. Rules about gender, about success, about power, about expression. Rules about what kind of person gets to be seen, heard, and loved. Culture didn't ask you for permission. Coded you through repetition. And repetition becomes identity. Even religion, even community values, beautiful in some ways, also install defaults. Worthiness, guilt, roles, purpose, shame. Each belief you accepted before you were aware became another brick in the wall of inherited identity. Now zoom out. Add in early trauma, the unresolved pain, the events that taught you, this part of me is not safe to show. These traumas didn't just scar you emotionally, they trained your identity to fragment. You built emotional armor. You locked parts of yourself away. You built entire personality traits as camouflage for pain. None of this was chosen. All of it was inherited or adapted. But here's the revelation. Anything inherited can be released. You are not required to carry forward identity traits that were built from other people's wounds. You are not obligated to replay the unprocessed stories of generations before you. You get to look at each part and ask, is this truly me? Or is this what I was taught to be? If you were told you're too emotional, maybe that was their fear of depth. If you were told you're not creative, maybe that was their failure to explore. If you were told to toughen up, maybe that was their way of hiding fragility. Let this land deeply. You are not here to carry what broke them. You are here to repair the lineage by choosing differently. But before that choice becomes sustainable, you must do something powerful. Identify the voices inside your identity that do not belong to you. Who told you to play small? Who taught you to avoid conflict? Whose approval are you still chasing with every decision? Whose version of success are you secretly performing for? These aren't rhetorical questions. These are the keys to unlocking inherited identity. Once you locate the voice, you can silence it. Once you recognize the program, you can rewrite it. But this is more than mental work. This requires energetic ownership. Say this clearly and feel it fully. This identity was installed. It is not my essence. I am now uninstalling what no longer serves. That declaration cuts through lifetimes of unconscious repetition. Now the fog lifts. Now you can see the constructed personality, not as failure, not as flaw, but as protective design. And now, with full awareness, you can begin construction of something real. But to build new architecture, we must first walk through the doorway of the unknown. Next, we will step into the most critical transition space, where the old identity dissolves, but the new one hasn't fully formed. That space is where fear tries to pull you back. But it's also the portal to everything your default self could never reach. You've now uncovered the truth of your inherited programming. You've seen how your identity was assembled, not chosen, not designed, but transferred into you before you knew what choice even was. Now, something strange is starting to happen. You no longer fully relate to the old self. The story you've always told, about who you are, what you do, what you fear, it's losing its grip. The emotions still flicker, but they don't feel like yours. The thoughts still show up, but they echo through an empty hallway. You've stepped into what we call the quantum gap. This is not an idea. It's a space, a threshold. It's the psychological and energetic state that exists between two identities, where one is being dismantled and the other is still loading. And it's the most misunderstood and most important part of the entire reboot process. Because in this gap, everything feels uncertain. You don't know how to answer basic questions anymore. What do I want? What do I believe? What comes next? The old answers no longer fit, but the new answers haven't arrived. And that's not a problem. That's the portal. Let's understand this clearly. The quantum gap is where the ego starts to panic. Because the ego thrives on identity. It wants labels, familiarity, predictability, safety. It wants to know who it is, even if that identity is limiting or painful. So when you begin dismantling the inherited identity, the ego interprets that as death. You'll feel this as emotional turbulence, thoughts of going back, memories pulling you toward the old version, temptations to collapse into old habits, just to feel real again. But this is not a regression. This is the detox. You're releasing the energetic blueprint of who you were, and that process will often feel like floating without coordinates. Most people can't handle this. They panic, mistake the discomfort for danger, and retreat into the familiar. But not you. You're learning how to stay in the gap. Because this space, this in-between, is sacred. Here, in the absence of a fixed identity, you're touching something pure, the formless field of who you truly are before any story was written. This is where choice becomes real. Not reactive, not inherited, but sovereign. And this is where transformation accelerates if you allow it. Now, here's the key to navigating the quantum gap. You must stop trying to define yourself and start experiencing yourself. This means moving your attention from mental labels to energetic sensations. Ask, what does freedom feel like in my body? What does possibility feel like in my chest? What does power feel like before it becomes performance? Don't rush to answer with words. Sit with the sensation. Let it rise. Because in this gap, you're not building a new identity through logic. You're allowing the real self to emerge through energy. And here's the paradox. The more comfortable you become with not knowing who you are, the more clearly your essence begins to surface. You'll feel nudges, subtle shifts, preferences returning without pressure, desires appearing without shame, moments of alignment that feel like remembering, not discovering. That's not randomness. That's your core self coming online. It doesn't rush. It doesn't shout. It reveals. But only when you stop clinging to what you were. So in the quantum gap, the work is not to figure out the next version of you. The work is to grieve the old self without reattaching to it. To observe the emptiness without labeling it as lost. To honor the confusion as the sign that old programming is finally being erased. And while this can be deeply uncomfortable, it's also where your deepest clarity is born. Because in the silence of the gap, you start to hear your own signal again. Not the voice of society, not the voice of your parents, not the survival identity. But you, hold the space. Let it stretch. You are not collapsing, you are reforming. And just when the ego starts begging for the old mask back, something else stirs. Something primal and ancient and powerful. That stirring is your real self rising. But before it fully takes shape, the ego will fight to survive. Next, we will look directly at that battle, the invisible war within, where your ego unleashes every defense to keep you locked in your old story. Now that you've entered the quantum gap, you've started to let go of the identity that once defined every choice you made. And just as your real self begins to stir, another force rises to stop you. This is the ego's final stand. Let's be clear. The ego is not evil. It's not your enemy. It was built to protect you, to keep you safe, functional, accepted, and stable. But safety is not truth. Safety is not growth. And the ego doesn't know the difference. It sees all identity change as threat. Not a new opportunity. Not a better future. A literal death. Because for the ego, you are your story. Strip the story and it believes you're gone. So when you start questioning your old roles, releasing inherited narratives, deleting trauma-based patterns, the ego reacts fast. Not through words, but through defense mechanisms that feel like you, but aren't. Let's break down the system. 1. Rationalization. The ego will manufacture logic to support the old self. You'll start to hear thoughts like, "That's just not realistic. Now isn't the right time. Maybe I should just be grateful for what I have. This new identity stuff is getting out of hand." These aren't insights. They're distractions. Logic laced with fear. Rationalization makes the comfort zone sound noble. But it's just camouflage. 2. Emotional hijacking. You'll find yourself in random bursts of anxiety, sadness, frustration. Out of nowhere. These aren't signs you're doing something wrong. They're the ego flooding your nervous system with emotion, hoping you'll confuse discomfort with misalignment. But you're not your emotions. You're the field they pass through. Let them pass. 3. Procrastination and delay. You'll suddenly feel the need to figure it all out first. You'll want to wait until things feel more certain. Until you read one more book. Take one more course. Delay is the ego's most seductive trap because it feels responsible. But the identity reboot doesn't require more information. It requires frequency alignment. Start before you're ready. 4. Sabotage loops. You'll sabotage the new self. Subconsciously. You'll miss meetings. You'll forget rituals. You'll scroll instead of embody. You'll pick fights. You'll withdraw from aligned connections. Why? Because part of your system still believes it's safer to stay small than to expand. This isn't a flaw. It's a program. But now you're the one holding the remote. 5. Old voices reappearing. You'll start hearing the voice of your inner critic. The old parent. The doubting teacher. The insecure friend. Not literally, but energetically. These are residual scripts from your original programming. The ego plays them like a mixtape. Remember who you were. Don't forget what happens when you try to grow. Don't silence them. Just recognize. These voices aren't now. They're echoes. And echoes only hold power if you feed them your attention. So how do you win this invisible war? You don't fight. You witness. You watch the ego perform its defense dance. And you stay still, centered, aware. You say, "Ah, there you are. The old identity's last attempt to hold me." You don't react. You don't justify. You don't collapse. You hold your frequency. And that's what dissolves the ego's grip. Because nothing weakens the survival identity faster than calm, conscious presence. Now here's the key. You don't need to kill the ego. You need to reassign its job. You tell it, "Thank you for protecting me, but I don't need you to run the show anymore. I'm safe, I'm conscious, and I choose." That internal shift is where sovereignty begins. You are no longer being puppeteered by the fear of not existing. You've entered the stage of creation. Next, we will activate a new level of awareness, the most critical tool in the transformation process, where you stop identifying with your thoughts and start watching them as a separate field entirely. By now, you've faced the defenses of the ego. You've seen how it reacts, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. And you've started to witness it instead of collapse into it. This witnessing is not just a mental trick. It's the beginning of one of the most powerful identity shifts possible, the shift into the observer. This chapter introduces a realization that changes everything. You are not your thoughts. You are the one watching the thoughts. This sounds simple, maybe even obvious, but it isn't. It's seismic, because until now, the thoughts felt like you. They narrated your reality. They justified your identity. They created your emotions, directed your reactions, and fed the ego. But that inner narrator isn't your essence. It's just a voice. And you've never actually been the voice. You've always been the field of awareness that hears the voice. Let's sit with that. You are not the doubt that says, I can't. You are the awareness that noticed the thought saying, I can't. You are not the fear that rises before risk. You are the stillness beneath the fear, the one watching it rise. This is the observer paradox. As soon as you observe a thought, it's no longer in control of you. The power of thought depends on unconscious fusion. Once observed, it becomes just content. And you remain free. This is how transformation accelerates. When you fully identify with a thought, it becomes part of your self-image. You believe it, act from it, spiral inside it. It shapes your day, your choices, your entire perception of reality. But when you say, there is a thought saying I'm not ready, something shifts. You don't argue with the thought. You don't try to replace it. You witness it. And witnessing dissolves identification. Now your identity begins to detach from its own machinery. You start seeing the mind like a theater. Thoughts are characters. Beliefs are costumes. Stories are scripts. The ego is the director. But you're sitting in the audience, watching it all. Still, present, unmoved. That seat in the audience, that's where real power lives. Because from that seat, you can make choices that aren't reactive. You can allow old thoughts without obeying them. You can experience emotion without drowning in it. You don't need to fix the mind. You just need to remember you are not the mind. Here's a practice that makes this real. When a strong emotion or self-judgment appears, try this. Label it. There is a thought of fear. There is a story of rejection. There is an emotion of anger. Then ask, who is noticing this right now? Sit with that awareness. Feel the space between you and the thought. That space is freedom. Because if you can see it, you are not it. You are the witness, the container, the stable field. Now, something subtle but profound happens as you practice this. The more often you observe thoughts without fusing with them, the less real those thoughts become. They start to lose energy. They feel less personal. They arise and dissolve, like passing clouds. And beneath those clouds, stillness, spaciousness. That's the real you. Not the content, but the context. Not the thought, but the awareness in which thought happens. And when you live from this awareness, identity becomes flexible. You're no longer stuck reinforcing a fixed self. You become adaptive, responsive, conscious, clear. This is the beginning of what we'll soon call identity collapse, but in the best way possible. Because the only identity worth keeping is the one that can change without fear. From this new seat of awareness, you don't need to protect your old beliefs. You can question them, challenge them, reshape them without ego backlash. You're no longer fighting yourself. You're watching yourself and choosing with intention. And that's when the reboot truly begins. Next, we will activate that power fully by initiating a deliberate collapse of the old identity structure. Not through chaos, but through conscious demolition. You've activated the observer. You've begun watching the mental loops that once defined you. You've stopped reacting. You've started noticing. Now comes the moment most people avoid. Collapse. Let's define this clearly. Identity collapse is not breakdown. It's not emotional chaos. It's not spiraling. It's the intentional, conscious dismantling of the personality you never chose to begin with. Collapse in this context is powerful, sacred, liberating. It means deconstructing the parts of yourself that were built from fear, trauma, people-pleasing, survival, and inherited shame, and watching them fall away without resistance. So how do you do this? You start with a single question. What part of me have I kept alive only because I didn't know I could let it die? Maybe it's the overachiever, the people-pleaser, the avoidant, the perfectionist, the skeptic, the caretaker, the rebel. These roles were useful once. They helped you fit in, avoid punishment, earn love, feel safe. But now, they are the scaffolding of a version of you that no longer needs to exist. And so you collapse them. One by one, you acknowledge them, thank them, and release them. This isn't symbolic. It's energetic. Here's how it works. You begin identifying each personality trait or emotional reflex you're ready to release. You write them down. You say them out loud. You call them by name. Then, from the seat of the observer, you dismantle their meaning. You say, I no longer need to be this to feel worthy. I no longer define myself by this performance. I release this version with gratitude and without fear. You do this not as a motivational chant, but as an act of energetic closure. You may feel resistance. Let it come. That's normal. That's the ego watching its mask being removed. But you hold your ground, because each time you let a false self die, you come one step closer to alignment. Now let's be clear. This collapse isn't about removing every trait. It's about removing every identity formed from unconsciousness. You are not erasing your essence. You are removing the noise around it. And yes, you might feel empty afterward. You might feel like a clean slate. That's not a problem. That's the goal. Because from emptiness, you gain access to pure signal. Now a warning. After collapse, the mind will rush to rebuild. It will want to install a new role quickly, just to feel like someone again. Don't let it. Stay with the stillness. Let the reboot finish downloading before you assign new code. Because what comes next isn't another personality overlay. What comes next is a frequency, your core frequency, untouched by trauma, trend, or past. And that frequency is what we're tuning into now. Next, we will teach you how to detect your unconditioned self beneath all the programs and begin constructing identity from signal instead of story. Now that the false layers have begun to collapse, you're standing in a rare space, the raw field of possibility. You've removed masks. You've paused the ego. You've interrupted decades of automation. But without the old scripts, without the emotional reflexes, without the prepackaged identity, what remains? Signal. What we call your core frequency. This frequency isn't something you invent. It's not something you decide to be. It's what's already there, underneath every thought, every behavior, every distortion that ever got layered on top. And now you're finally ready to feel it. Let's begin with what it isn't. Your core frequency is not your mood. It's not your thoughts. It's not even your values. It's the baseline energetic resonance that flows when you stop performing, when you stop trying to be anyone at all. You've felt this before in rare moments, when time disappeared, when there was no anxiety about past or future, when you weren't striving or surviving, just being. That was your frequency. But most people feel it only by accident. Your job now is to feel it on purpose. So how do you calibrate to your core frequency? First, you silence the noise. Noise is the internal chatter that says, you should be doing more. This isn't enough. You need to prove yourself. Noise is every inherited belief still trying to run your decisions. You begin tuning it out by asking one core question. If there was nothing left to protect, who would I be right now? When you ask that, the mind doesn't know what to say. And that's good, because your mind has been answering every question up until now. But your frequency doesn't speak in words. It speaks in sensation. Start by sitting still, not with your body, but with your being. Pay attention to where you feel the most alive. What thoughts bring you peace without effort? What ideas feel magnetic even when they're unfamiliar? What actions feel natural even if they challenge your comfort zone? These are indicators, traces of your frequency surfacing. Now here's where the calibration happens. You begin matching your behaviors to that frequency, not to obligation, fear, or logic. This is not about motivation. It's about resonance. You are aligning your choices with what feels fundamentally correct at the level of essence, not identity. And every time you choose in alignment, your signal strengthens. You'll notice things begin to organize around you. People respond differently. Ideas flow. Synchronicities occur. Why? Because coherence attracts order. When you emit your real frequency without distortion, reality becomes a matchmaker. It brings you what resonates, clears what doesn't. And here's the shift that seals this process. You stop acting from identity, and you start listening to frequency. Not what should I do, but what feels in signal with my truest self. And if the answer doesn't arrive in words, that's fine. It might arrive in silence, in clarity, in the relief of not needing to figure it out. Because the signal guides differently than the mind. It doesn't push, it pulls. And as you learn to follow that pull, you begin to form a new kind of identity. An identity that is not assembled, but attuned. You become less like a character and more like a transmission. You're no longer trying to be someone, you're broadcasting something. And what you're broadcasting now has the power to shape every part of your external world. Because frequency is not passive. It's creative. Which leads us into the deeper laws of reality itself. Next, we will break open the science behind why this frequency, this identity signal, doesn't just influence your internal state. It alters the physical world around you. You've tuned into your core frequency, that deep, stable signal beneath all identity noise. Now it's time to understand the full power of that signal. Not just emotionally, not psychologically, but physically. Because the beliefs you hold, the frequency you emit, are not isolated to your body or mind. They interact with your reality directly. This is not spiritual metaphor. It's physics. Let's talk about the quantum code. At the quantum level, the level where atoms, electrons, and subatomic particles operate, matter doesn't behave like fixed stuff. It behaves like probability. Particles exist in a state of potential until observed. They don't lock into one form until something or someone collapses the wave function. That someone is you. Your observation, your focused awareness, actually influences how potential becomes reality. But not all observation is equal. The emotional and energetic charge behind your attention matters. A belief isn't just a thought. It's a high-frequency instruction sent to the field. A strong belief, repeated, emotionally anchored, and identity-linked, becomes a command to the quantum layer of reality. That command says, create more of this. So when you say, I always attract chaos, the universe doesn't correct you. It responds, understood. Chaos it is. When you believe, I'm not worthy of abundance, the field doesn't argue. It aligns with your signal. But when your frequency says, I am aligned with impact, clarity, and truth, and you mean it, everything begins to bend to that signal. Because the quantum field doesn't give you what you want. It gives you what you are. Now let's be precise. The universe doesn't respond to vague positivity. It responds to coherent frequency. That means your beliefs, emotions, thoughts, and behaviors must all line up with what you claim to be. If you say, I am powerful, but secretly feel small, your frequency is fractured. If you say, I'm abundant, but take action from fear, your signal cancels itself out. That's why most affirmations don't work. The mouth says one thing, the nervous system says another, and the field obeys the stronger signal, which is usually fear. So what's the fix? You stop trying to force belief and start feeling into coherence. You make micro-choices that match your claimed identity. You act in ways that say, I already am this, not I'm hoping to become this. Because the quantum field responds fastest to embodied certainty. Let's look at an example. Say your identity is shifting toward leadership. You want to influence, speak, create change. You can't just sit in silence hoping to feel confident one day. You have to speak as if it's already who you are. You write. You record. You say no to roles that keep you small. You move in alignment with the frequency, not the fear. Every action reinforces the quantum code. And with each repetition, the field around you adjusts. People show up. Resources arrive. Timelines collapse. This is not luck. It's law. Now, one critical detail. You must stop waiting for external evidence before reinforcing belief. Belief must precede proof. Because once you truly believe something, you start emitting the signal that attracts it. But most people reverse it. They wait for results to believe and stay stuck in limbo. You're not most people. You've already begun rewiring your identity. You're already moving in alignment. You're already generating frequency on purpose. So now use that power. Don't just notice what you believe, choose what you believe. And once chosen, live like it's already true. Not blindly, not recklessly, but energetically. Live from it emotionally. Speak from it. Move from it. Act as the transmission of the reality you're creating. Because belief, held with emotional charge, projected through aligned behavior, becomes quantum instruction. And reality will not ignore instruction that precise. Next, we will uncover the invisible anchors that silently pull you back to your old self, no matter how aligned your signal becomes, and how to reset the internal thermostat that decides just how far you're allowed to evolve. You've learned how belief, emotion, and frequency command the quantum field. You've seen how coherent identity isn't just internal, it literally shapes your external world. But now we need to examine the silent saboteur that keeps pulling you back into the old self, even after you've aligned with something higher. This force is invisible. It's subtle, but it's precise, and it controls how far you're allowed to go before your system hits the brakes. It's called the identity set point. Think of a thermostat in a room. You set it to 72 degrees. If the temperature rises above that, the AC kicks in. If it drops too low, the heat activates. Your nervous system works the same way. So does your subconscious identity. There's a hidden internal temperature, emotionally, mentally, energetically, that you've been trained to maintain. Not by choice, but by pattern. That set point determines how much love you're comfortable receiving, how much money you'll allow in, how deeply you'll let yourself be seen, how safe you feel when things get too good. When life starts exceeding your identity set point, your system intervenes. You start feeling off. You sabotage. You procrastinate. You create emotional drama. You delay action. You retreat into old habits. Why? Because you crossed the threshold of what your identity is calibrated to expect. Even joy can feel like a threat if your set point is built around suffering. So here's the breakthrough. It's not your goals that shape your results. It's your set point. And unless your goals match your internal temperature, you'll always find a way to snap back. Let's take an example. Say someone's identity is wired for scarcity. They've always made just enough. They grew up hearing money is tight. That's their default emotional climate: uncertainty, tension, survival. Then they get a windfall, a new client, promotion. They suddenly receive more than their system is used to. They should feel good, but instead they feel anxious. They spend impulsively. They delay invoicing. They take on unnecessary expenses. Within a few weeks, the money's gone. Not because they're irresponsible, because they exceeded their wealth set point and their identity corrected the imbalance. The subconscious says, "This isn't who we are." That line, "This isn't who we are," is the voice of the set point. It activates when you get more attention than usual. Kicks in when you find a partner who treats you better than your past self believed possible. It whispers when you start showing up consistently for your goals. And it always pulls you back to baseline unless you consciously reset the dial. So how do you reset it? First, awareness. Start identifying the specific areas where you repeatedly snap back. What feels too good to sustain? Where do you feel the urge to pull away just as things are improving? What triggers a sudden loss of momentum when things are working? These are not failures. They're data. They show you exactly where your current identity stops believing. Second, disruption. Each time you feel the system trying to return to baseline, you interrupt it. Not by force, but by presence. You say, "This sensation is a symptom of expansion, not danger. I am safe rising above my old temperature." You hold the new frequency long enough for the nervous system to re-regulate. That's the work. Not just stepping forward, but staying forward without panic. Third, rehearsal. The body must practice feeling good at new levels of identity. Joy must be rehearsed. Stability must be normalized. Confidence must become familiar. This means creating repeated experiences that gently stretch your emotional capacity to hold more. Celebrate small wins. Sit in success without apologizing for it. Breathe into visibility instead of shrinking from it. Each repetition rewrites the thermostat code. And here's what most people miss. Your set point is not just emotional. It's energetic. It's based on the frequency you've sustained longest, not what you say you want. That means even if you've done the inner work, your body might still be broadcasting the old identity temperature. So the reset must happen at the level of being, not just belief. This is how you stop yo-yoing between progress and sabotage. You don't chase higher outcomes. You elevate the set point that allows those outcomes to remain. And once the set point rises, results stop feeling like miracles. They feel inevitable. Next, we'll explore a dimension most people ignore when reshaping identity: the body. Because your body has stored every identity frequency you've ever practiced, and unless it's rewired, the past continues to speak through your nervous system. You've now identified your internal thermostat, your identity set point, and started noticing how it regulates your reality. But there's one place your old identity still hides and holds power, not in your thoughts, not in your goals, in your body, because every belief you've ever repeated, every emotion you've sustained, every role you've performed, created a chemical echo inside your physical system. Your body has literally been trained to feel like you. This is what we call your emotional signature. It's the unique blend of sensations, postures, microreactions, and neurochemical patterns that your system associates with self. Let's get specific. If your emotional signature has been built around anxiety, your body becomes efficient at producing it. If your emotional baseline has been frustration, your nervous system starts seeking situations that justify it. If you've lived for years in self-doubt, then calm, confident presence feels unfamiliar, even unsafe. This is why trying to think differently often fails, because the body still craves the chemical rhythm of the old identity. It wants the hit of cortisol that comes from worrying. It wants the spike of adrenaline that comes from chaos. It wants the tension, the contraction, the charge, because that's what feels like home. And here's where transformation accelerates or stalls. You can't fully shift your identity until your body unlearns the emotions that held the old self together. So how do you change your emotional signature? Start with awareness, again, not in the mind but in the body. Throughout your day, pause and check. What is my body feeling right now? Is this an emotion I want to normalize? This turns your emotional state from background noise into data. You start to realize that certain feelings don't belong to your present moment. They're just leftover habits. Next, rewriting through state rehearsal. If you want to become a person who lives from peace, confidence, or power, your body needs practice feeling those states before external results arrive. This is not faking. This is training. You sit, you breathe, you recall a moment of deep alignment, even if it was fleeting. You let that sensation expand in your body. You memorize it. You associate it with safety. And you do it again tomorrow. And again the next day. Repetition rewires chemistry. Then you start pairing new thoughts with the rehearsed state. Because emotion plus attention equals identity reinforcement. Say the new belief while feeling the new state. This is how your nervous system begins to accept the new identity as normal, not as fantasy. Here's the shift. Old identity said, feel fear, then act brave. New identity says, feel brave, then act accordingly. That feeling doesn't come from logic. It comes from internal chemistry, which you now control. Now, let's not ignore resistance. As you change your emotional signature, old triggers will still show up. You'll get invited back into anxiety, back into self-pity, back into anger. But now you have a choice. You say, this is familiar, not true. This is historical, not current. You allow the emotion to rise without feeding it attention. You don't suppress it. You don't dramatize it. You watch it. You breathe into it. You let it burn out like an expired signal because that's all it is. And in its place, you install something new. This is emotional sovereignty, not freedom from emotion, but freedom from identity through emotion. You no longer define yourself by what you feel. You become the one who decides what stays. Now you're ready for the deeper reset. Because these emotional patterns often originate from far earlier in life than we realize. Often before memory, before logic, before you ever had a chance to choose. Next, we'll travel into the source code itself, where the earliest emotional templates were written, and where the deepest identity rewrites begin. Your emotional signature, the pattern your body memorized, didn't form in isolation. It was shaped by moments. Moments that burned themselves into your nervous system. Moments you may barely remember, but that shaped how you feel about safety, love, attention, and power. These moments left behind something more than memory. They left behind trauma templates. Let's make this clear. Trauma isn't just the obvious events: abuse, violence, loss. It's also the silent moments that taught you, I'm not enough, I'm not safe, I don't matter, or I have to perform to be loved. Trauma is any experience that overwhelmed your capacity to process it and got stored as identity. And those stored fragments become templates, unconscious scripts your system uses to predict the world. These templates define your reactions. They tell you who to trust, how much love to allow, when to hide, what to fear, and what not to expect. They operate below thought, but they control thought. Here's an example. Let's say you grew up in a home where anger was unpredictable. As a child, you had no power, no control. You adapted. You became hyper-aware. You scanned for cues. You shut down your expression to stay safe. Now, as an adult, you freeze during conflict. You avoid confrontation. You minimize your needs. Not because you choose to, because the trauma template still runs your response system. Or maybe love was conditional. Affection came only when you achieved something, pleased someone, or played the good kid. Now you feel guilty resting. You overfunction in relationships. You fear being a burden. And you call it your personality. It's not your personality. It's a trauma-shaped identity. And the danger is, these templates don't just live in your past. They keep casting votes in your present. Every time you try to rise, they whisper warnings. Every time you connect deeply, they wait for abandonment. Every time you reach for more, they generate guilt. So how do you break them? First, stop trying to outgrow them intellectually. You can't logic your way out of a body-based identity template. You have to witness the imprint. That means slowing down enough to feel the original response when it shows up. When discomfort arises, ask, what is this reaction trying to protect me from? Who did I need to be when I first felt this? What did this teach me about myself that might not be true? These questions bring the template out of hiding. Next, you begin to separate the emotion from the meaning. The emotion, fear, shame, guilt, is real. But the meaning, I'm not safe, I'm not worthy, I must not be seen, is a child's interpretation. It was never universal truth. You feel the feeling fully, but you stop assigning the old meaning. That's when the pattern starts losing power. You're giving your body a new experience of safety with the same sensation. That reprograms the template. Then comes the final step, identity reclamation. You name the version of you that formed during the trauma, not as a flaw but as an intelligent protector. The avoider, the pleaser, the suppressor, the performer, the ghost. You thank them, you honor them, but you no longer obey them. Because now your life is not about safety, it's about truth. And truth requires expression. Expression of emotion. Expression of power. Expression of essence. This is why you do this work. Not to fix what's broken, but to reclaim what was hidden. Trauma didn't damage you. It disconnected you from your body, from your worth, from your right to feel, express, expand, and take up space. Now you reconnect. And that reconnection starts where it all began, in the earliest, most unprotected version of you. Next, we return to the origin point where the first identity scripts were installed and where the deepest rewrites are possible, the space of your inner child. You've seen how trauma doesn't just hurt, it shapes. It builds templates that define how you live, love, and limit yourself. But all of those templates share a single origin point, your inner child. Not a concept, not an archetype, an actual imprint, still alive inside your emotional system, that holds the root identity behind every reaction. The inner child isn't just a memory of who you were. It's the foundation of who you believe you are. And now that foundation must be revisited, not to relive pain, but to recode the instructions you've been following ever since. Let's break it open. Your inner child was the original self, before performance, before roles, before survival adaptations. You were intuitive, expressive, receptive, open. But the world wasn't built to hold that purity. So it began reshaping you. And your inner child, needing love, protection, and connection, adapted. If emotions weren't safe, you learned to suppress. If needs weren't met, you learned to not have them. If visibility brought pain, you learned to shrink. But you didn't just adapt behavior, you formed identity around those choices. You began to believe, this is just who I am. I'm too much. I'm not enough. I can't trust people. I have to be strong. I need to be quiet. I must never show weakness. And those beliefs hardened into identity. Not because they were true, but because they felt safe. The work now is to return to that child. Not with pity, with power. You are not going back to relive their fear. You are going back to show them who they were always allowed to be. Here's how it works. First, recognition. You acknowledge that your inner child is not gone. Their emotions, beliefs, and unmet needs are still alive, showing up in your adult life as triggers, insecurity, and reactivity. You stop ignoring the tantrums, the shutdowns, the sensitivity, the fear of abandonment. Instead, you see them for what they are, signals from the original you asking to be heard. Second, reparenting. This means giving your inner child what they never received, through your adult self. Not just with words, with action, boundaries, validation, and presence. You stop outsourcing love. You stop begging others to give you what your child self needed. You become the source. You say, I hear you. You're allowed to feel this. You're not alone anymore. We're not in that story now. You're safe with me. This creates an internal safety loop. A new bond. One that rewires trust not just in others but in yourself. Third, permission. You give your inner child the permission they never had. To be loud. To rest. To speak truth. To receive love. To feel joy without guilt. And with every act of permission, you release stored shame. Stored contraction. Stored false identity. Because that child never wanted to be invisible. They were taught to be. Now you're undoing the teaching. And here's where it shifts from healing to rewriting. Once safety is restored, you start teaching your inner child how to live in your current reality, where the threats are gone, but the reactions linger. You bring them forward into your present. You say, watch how we express now. Watch how we set boundaries now. Watch how we stay calm. Even when things feel uncertain. You don't abandon them. You lead them. Because the inner child isn't meant to stay in the past. They're meant to be reintegrated into your full power. Not as a wound, as your essence. And when that happens, when the original you stops hiding and starts co-creating, your entire identity shifts. You no longer operate from defense. You operate from alignment. You don't ask for permission anymore. You remember that you never needed it. This is inner child technology. It's not therapy. It's not nostalgia. It's the energetic architecture of conscious adulthood. Next, we bring this transformation full circle by applying the most radical update to your internal system. The act of forgiveness not as an emotional gesture but as a quantum deletion of story. Now that you've made contact with your inner child, not just as a memory but as a living frequency, the groundwork has been laid. You've begun rewriting the core code. You've started giving that younger self new permissions, new truths, new neural pathways. But there's one more loop that must be closed. Because every version of you, the performer, the people pleaser, the avoider, the overachiever, the invisible one, carried a story. A story you've been repeating. A story that shaped your expectations. A story that demanded loyalty long after it stopped serving you. And now, it's time to release it, without bitterness, without bypassing, without delay. This chapter is about quantum forgiveness. Not surface-level forgiveness. Not the kind where you tell yourself, I should be over this by now. Not the kind where you forgive someone for them. This is a frequency reset. A deletion of karmic imprint. A total energetic liberation. But here's the shift. Quantum forgiveness isn't about making peace with what happened. It's about releasing your identity as the one it happened to. You can keep the wisdom without keeping the wound. Let that land. The old story was necessary for a time. It helped you understand your pain. It gave you language. It gave your suffering a shape. It validated your experience. But now the story is no longer truth. It's just a memory loop, and the longer you keep playing it, the more your reality matches it. So let's start by identifying the stories you've used as anchors. I was abandoned, so I can't trust. I was overlooked, so I need to prove myself. I was betrayed, so I always stay guarded. I was hurt, so I don't open fully anymore. Now pause. Ask yourself, who am I when I no longer narrate life through this filter? Forgiveness begins the moment you choose to release your identity as the hurt one. This doesn't erase the facts. It erases the attachment to being defined by them. And here's the powerful realization. You don't need justice to heal. You don't need an apology. You don't need closure. You don't even need the other person to change. Because forgiveness doesn't happen between you and them. It happens between you and the field. It's the act of choosing a clean signal, one unpolluted by resentment, bitterness, or the compulsion to carry proof of pain. So how do you forgive on a quantum level? Start with this declaration. This story ends with me. Then speak directly to the identity that formed around the wound. You say, I release the version of me that needed this pain to feel real. I thank the story for what it taught me. I now extract the lesson and delete the pattern. And then you do what few are ever taught to do. You remove your loyalty to the wound. That loyalty, the impulse to keep referencing what they did, how they failed you, why you can't trust, is a form of emotional addiction. It gives you a sense of self. And now you're brave enough to give that up. Because you're not here to be right. You're here to be free. Quantum forgiveness isn't passive. It's decisive. You choose to stop sourcing your identity from what broke you. You choose to stop leaking energy through imaginary conversations with ghosts from the past. You choose to return your frequency to yourself whole, undivided, clear. And here's what happens next. The field begins to reorganize. The emotional charge weakens. The looping thoughts stop sticking. The resentment decays without reinforcement. You begin to feel lighter, not because the past changed, but because you're no longer carrying it into the present. This is the kind of forgiveness that upgrades identity. It's not softness. It's sovereignty. You forgive not because they deserve it, but because you do. You release the story so you can write a new one authored not by trauma, but by conscious intention. Which brings us now to the moment you've been preparing for across every previous chapter. The old identity is dismantled. The nervous system has been reset. The emotional residue has been released. Now you're ready to design the next version of yourself. Not from reaction, but from precision. You've arrived at the threshold. The false identities have collapsed. The trauma templates have been exposed. The inner child has been reclaimed. The emotional set points have been reset. The stories have been deleted. Now there's space, real space. And into that space you get to architect something new. Not just mentally, but vibrationally, behaviorally, energetically. This is where you begin avatar design. Not fantasy, not performance, not a mask. An intentional, coherent, multidimensional upgrade to your identity. Based on alignment, not memory. Let's get practical. First, the framework. Your avatar, the next version of you, is not random. It's structured. You're going to design it like a blueprint. You begin with clarity. Who are you when you're not living through fear? What does that version of you believe? Feel? Communicate? Attract? Create? These aren't vague aspirations. You get specific. You write down, in present tense, the identity traits of the new you. I trust myself. I honor my boundaries. I speak with precision and power. I attract aligned opportunities effortlessly. I feel safe being seen. I embody calm even in uncertainty. Each sentence isn't just a goal. It's a frequency command. Next, you assign evidence behaviors to each trait. If you say, I trust myself, what do you do each day that proves it? If you say, I embody calm, how do you show up in moments that used to trigger chaos? This is where the design becomes embodied. You're not just affirming. You're rehearsing the new self through microactions. Every decision becomes a signal broadcast. Every aligned action becomes proof to your nervous system. This is who we are now. Then comes environmental reinforcement. Your space, your relationships, your digital habits, they all must reflect the avatar identity. Because your environment is an amplifier. You either reinforce your old self by accident or reinforce your new self by design. Audit your inputs. What kind of energy are you feeding your system? What conversations do you engage in? What images surround you? What behaviors do you tolerate from yourself and others? These choices aren't small. They either stabilize the avatar or sabotage it. Now we go deeper. You begin emotion encoding. Your nervous system needs to feel the new identity in your body, not once, but consistently. So you build emotional memory around the avatar. Each morning you sit in stillness. You visualize yourself as the new identity, not achieving but being. You breathe into it. You embody the emotion. You let your cells taste the frequency. That repetition becomes a biological anchor. And with enough practice, the avatar isn't something you perform. It becomes something you return to naturally, automatically, without effort. That's when you've crossed the line from design to embodiment. But let's be honest. The old identity will occasionally resurface. Not because you failed, because you're human. When that happens, you don't panic. You don't regress. You don't collapse. You simply say, that's the old signal. It's familiar, but it's not current. And you step back into the blueprint. Because design is not a one-time event. It's a daily broadcast. Every time you honor the avatar, your frequency sharpens. Every time you repeat its emotional pattern, your energy aligns. And soon reality shifts, not as a fluke, as a match. This is identity not as concept, but as code. And once that code is stable, results stop being chased. They become magnetic. Next, you'll see how to take this designed identity and make it visibly real in the world. Not by forcing, but by learning how to embody the future before it arrives. You've now written the blueprint. The avatar identity is no longer a concept. It's a coded vision, charged with clarity, emotion, and intent. But blueprints don't build the structure. Frequency doesn't manifest change on its own. There's one step left before transformation becomes reality. Embodiment. This chapter is about living from the new identity now, before the results show up, before the evidence arrives, before the world reflects back what you know is true inside. Let's begin here. You don't get what you want. You don't get what you visualize. You get what you embody, consistently, fully, without contradiction. Embodiment means your body, emotions, language, posture, tone, micro-decisions, and energetic presence are all matching the frequency of the future self. Today, you stop waiting. You stop rehearsing. You start broadcasting. And embodiment isn't a feeling. It's a discipline. Here's the truth most avoid. Until your body feels safe being the new version of you, it will sabotage you behind the scenes. You've upgraded the code. Now you must anchor it into physical reality. Start with posture and movement. Your nervous system is pattern-based. It associates certain postures with safety, even if those postures are disempowered. If you've spent years slouching, speaking softly, avoiding eye contact, breathing shallow, your system is calibrated to fear and suppression. The new identity must move differently. Ask, how does my future self walk into a room? How does this version of me breathe when I speak? What is my resting presence saying before I even say a word? This isn't about performance. It's about alignment. Even when alone, the way you carry your body is either reinforcing your avatar identity or weakening it. Now focus on language. Your words are not descriptive, they're creative. Every sentence you speak is a reality command. Stop saying, I'm trying. Stop saying, I always struggle with that. Stop apologizing for your clarity. Speak from certainty. Speak from completion. Speak as if the new you is already here, because the moment you say it, your system begins making it true. Next, decision-making. This is where embodiment becomes visible. The avatar identity doesn't live in vision boards or meditation. It lives in your calendar, your habits, your conversations, your responses to pressure. Every choice is a vote. You ask, what would the fully embodied version of me say yes to right now? What would they decline? Not out of fear, but because it's not aligned. The answers won't always be easy. That's the point. Embodiment costs comfort, costs familiarity, but it returns authentic power. Now let's address emotional frequency. The old self lived in survival states: guilt, shame, scarcity, hypervigilance. The new self must live in elevated emotional coherence. Calm, clarity, grounded certainty. This doesn't mean you never feel doubt. It means you no longer collapse into it. You don't wait to become confident. You choose to feel confident on purpose, before proof appears. You don't wait to feel peace once life calms down. You generate peace as your default signal, because that signal becomes your magnet. Now understand this: the world will test your embodiment. People will challenge it. Old dynamics will resurface. Delays will occur. Not because you're wrong, but because your embodiment needs to hold its frequency under pressure. This is where most people break. They interpret temporary misalignment as failure. But the new self is forged in those moments. You say, this reaction doesn't match the self I've chosen. Then you reset, over and over, without shame. Embodiment is not perfection. It's consistency under tension. That's what teaches your nervous system. This is who I am now. And when that lesson is integrated, reality follows. Not instantly, but inevitably. You start attracting based on signal, not strategy. You stop chasing change and start experiencing confirmation of what you've already become. Next, we'll decode exactly why those confirmations can seem delayed and how reality tests new identities before fully reflecting them back to you. You've begun embodying the avatar. You're speaking, choosing, and moving from your future self. You're no longer theorizing transformation, you're living it. But something unexpected starts to happen. Just as you gain momentum, the world doesn't shift right away. In fact, you might feel like things temporarily get harder. Delays pop up. Challenges surface. Old patterns reappear. This is where many people panic. They assume their work isn't working. But what's really happening is this: you've triggered a reality lag and a physics-based identity test. Let's break this down. Your identity, once upgraded, becomes a new energetic broadcast. It's like tuning a radio to a new station. But the external environment is still catching up. It's still reflecting the old signal. That's because reality has inertia. It takes time for your outer world to match the frequency of your inner shift. So instead of immediate change, you get a test. This test isn't punishment. It's not sabotage. It's not a sign that you failed. It's a feedback loop. The field is asking, do you really believe this new identity? Or was it conditional? You said, I'm powerful. Now you face a situation that tempts you to feel powerless. You said, I'm calm. Now a delay shows up, daring you to panic. You said, I'm worthy. Now someone ghosts you, giving you the chance to choose self-worth without external approval. These aren't traps. They're opportunities to lock in the frequency. Because nothing stabilizes identity faster than holding it in the absence of reward. Let that land. Anyone can feel abundant when money arrives. But can you hold the frequency of abundance before the deposit clears? Anyone can feel confident after applause. But can you feel worthy before the outcome appears? This is what identity reinforcement looks like. You're not reacting to results. You're calibrating results by maintaining emotional coherence. Now let's look at the trap. Most people abandon the new identity too early. They collapse at the first test. They interpret the lag as a sign to go back. That's the old self negotiating its return. You must recognize this moment when it arrives and say, this delay is a test. My job is not to force results. My job is to hold the signal. And that's exactly what shifts the field. Because the quantum field doesn't respond to hope. It responds to certainty. And certainty is demonstrated in your ability to act as if the outcome is already real, despite appearances. This is not delusion. It's alignment. You're not pretending. You're remaining coherent in the gap between who you've become and what the world reflects back. And each time you do that, your frequency imprints deeper. Now let's go further. When you pass the test, when you stay consistent under pressure, the external begins to reorganize. People shift. Opportunities open. Timelines compress. Not because you pushed harder, but because the universe mirrors your internal upgrade. And from this moment forward, you stop needing validation. Because you're no longer living for confirmation, you're living from identity. That shift makes you unshakable. So the next time it looks like nothing's working, pause. Ask yourself, am I being tested? Or am I being shown where my identity hasn't fully integrated? Then hold your frequency. Choose again. Stand firm. This is the physics of reinforcement. It's what separates temporary change from lasting transformation. And now that you understand the lag, you're ready to embed the new identity so deeply in your brain-body system that it becomes automatic. Next, we'll move into the final layer of full integration, rewiring the neural architecture around your future self so it runs without resistance. You've held the signal through the gap. You've embodied the new self without immediate reward. You've passed the identity tests that the field sent to verify your stability. Now it's time to go from conscious effort to automatic embodiment. This is the neural reboot, where the brain itself begins to fire in ways that reflect your future self as the default operating system. Let's unpack it. Your brain is not static. It's adaptable, flexible, responsive. Every time you repeat a thought, take an action, or feel an emotion, you fire specific neural circuits. Repeat those circuits enough and they wire together. This is how habits form. This is how identities are installed. Your old self, the one you've now replaced, was built through neural repetition. Your new self must be built the same way, but with conscious intention. This isn't about forcing yourself to think positive. This is about engineering neurological alignment with the identity you've chosen. Here's how it works. When you consistently think, feel, and act as the new identity, your brain can't tell the difference between real and rehearsed. It begins rewiring its connections to reflect the new baseline. And after enough repetition, the identity becomes reflexive. Not because you're trying harder, but because your brain has installed it as normal. Let's start with mental rehearsal. Each morning, before the world pulls your attention outward, you go inward. You visualize yourself as the embodied version of the avatar. Not achieving, but being. You see yourself speaking with calm confidence, making precise decisions, moving with clarity, saying no to what doesn't match. You don't imagine the result. You feel the frequency. This is key, because the brain wires faster when thought is paired with emotion. If you just visualize without feeling, nothing imprints. But if you combine mental rehearsal with emotional charge, you activate both cognitive and somatic learning. That's where rewiring accelerates. Next comes habit anchoring. You assign small, daily rituals to reinforce the avatar identity. These aren't random habits. These are symbolic actions that your brain can associate with the new self. Maybe it's a short voice memo each morning, speaking as your future self. Maybe it's a 90-second breath ritual to reset state before difficult decisions. Maybe it's 5 words you write every day that describe how you choose to show up. The point isn't complexity. The point is consistency, because consistency builds memory, and memory is identity. Now here's the part most overlooked. Language remapping. Your brain interprets your own voice as a primary input signal. Every time you say, "This is hard," or "I'm bad at that," or "I hope I can keep this up," you install a command. That command fires a network, and that network determines behavior. So from now on, you train your language to match your vision. Not empty affirmations, not fake enthusiasm, realigned language. I'm calibrating to this level now. I've decided to move from clarity, not from noise. This behavior no longer fits the identity I'm sustaining. Each phrase becomes a synaptic bridge, connecting thought to action. Let's talk about default override. There will be moments when your brain fires the old signal. That's not failure. That's biology. Your job is not to avoid it. Your job is to reroute it quickly and consistently. You catch the old loop mid-thought. I can't handle this. Wait, that's a previous version. This identity does handle this, and here's how. I don't belong here. That's not my current code. I belong wherever I choose to align with. This isn't delusion. It's reconditioning. You are not erasing the past. You are overriding its dominance. And every override strengthens the new network. Each time you choose awareness over automation, the brain shifts, until eventually it defaults to the new identity automatically. Now, let's add sensory reinforcement. The brain learns through immersion. If your space, music, visuals, and movement reflect your old self, you're sending mixed signals. So you audit your inputs. You create a physical environment that reflects your frequency. You curate sensory experiences that match the avatar. This is not aesthetics. This is neural signaling. Every texture, sound, and space your brain engages with is reinforcing something. Make sure it's reinforcing who you're becoming. Finally, remember this: rewiring doesn't require perfection. It requires repetition without emotional regression. When the old pattern resurfaces, you don't collapse. You don't start the story again. You pause. You update. You move forward. This is the reboot. Not just an idea, but a neurological, physical, emotional recalibration of who you are. And now that the wiring is stabilizing, we move into the final layer of embodiment. Repeating your identity until it becomes reality. Not just inside your mind, but in your biology, your relationships, your impact, your life. You've rewired your mind. You've broken the old neural loops. You've activated the avatar through emotion, thought, behavior, and space. But transformation doesn't hold unless it loops. And this is the final seal: repetition. Rhythm. Identity through frequency. Because what you do occasionally never rewires your self-perception. What you do consistently with full emotional resonance becomes identity. The frequency loop is your new normal. Let's make it clear. You are not becoming something new. You are stabilizing what has already been created in the field through consistency of signal. This is not repetition for repetition's sake. This is intelligent, aligned, emotionally charged reinforcement. Every day you repeat the identity signal, you ingrain the avatar deeper into your subconscious, your nervous system, your electromagnetic field. And that signal begins to alter the world around you. Not gradually, but geometrically. So how do you structure the frequency loop? First, morning activation. Before the external world enters your consciousness, you begin the day broadcasting your chosen identity. You revisit the traits. You speak them aloud. You feel them in your body. You generate the emotional frequency of the avatar. 5 minutes. Fully present. Non-negotiable. This becomes your baseline setting. Second, midday recalibration. The world will pull at your frequency. You'll be tempted into reaction, urgency, comparison. So you interrupt the drift. You stop. You reset. You ask, am I acting from the self I've chosen or the self I've retired? This question cuts through autopilot. You don't judge the slip. You re-enter the loop. Third, evening integration. Before sleep, you reinforce the signal again. You reflect not on what went wrong, but on every moment you honored the avatar. This isn't self-congratulation. It's neurological anchoring. You remind your system, this is who we are now. This is what we repeat. This is what we're stabilizing. And as you sleep, your brain begins to consolidate that identity into long-term memory. Now let's go deeper. Emotion is the amplifier. You can say the right words and take the right actions, but without emotional charge, it's flat. The frequency loop must feel real. So each repetition is accompanied by elevated emotion. Joy, clarity, expansion, inner peace. You teach your body to feel good in the new identity, not because results arrived, but because the signal itself is rewarding. This trains your system to want the new self, not resist it. Now let's address resistance. The mind will say, this is boring. This again. Is this even working? That's the old frequency defending its right to exist. You don't argue. You continue. You say, the signal must loop until it becomes subconscious. Then the subconscious will create results. Because results are not your responsibility. Repetition is. This is how change becomes natural. This is how the nervous system stops reacting with fear and starts operating in alignment. You no longer need motivation. You're running on identity momentum. Every loop builds energy. Every repetition compounds certainty. Until one day the loop isn't conscious anymore. You speak with power without needing to remember. You walk in calm without effort. You decide quickly, say no with ease, allow pleasure without guilt. Not because you tried harder, because the loop became real. And this is when your external life transforms. Not slowly, visibly, predictably. The loop does the work now. And from here, we lock in the frequency with rituals that anchor the avatar into your everyday life, turning identity into habit and habit into quantum coherence. The loop has begun. Your new identity is no longer a concept you visit. It's becoming a signal you repeat, align with, and reinforce. But the loop still needs anchors. Anchors are not motivation tricks or morning routines for the sake of structure. They are intentional rituals that lock your chosen frequency into the real world, across time, space, and action. This chapter is about identity anchoring, the design of daily, repeatable behaviors that stabilize your avatar identity inside the body and outside in reality. You don't rise to your highest self randomly. You rise through rhythm. Let's define what makes something an identity anchor. An anchor is a behavior or practice that reflects the values of the identity you've chosen, reinforces emotional coherence with that identity, requires just enough energy to engage intention, not overwhelm, repeats consistently until it becomes part of your baseline. This isn't about doing more. It's about doing what matters, repeatedly and consciously. Let's build your anchor system. We begin with the triad model, 3 categories of anchoring. 1. Frequency activation. This includes the rituals that elevate you emotionally and energetically each day. You're not waiting for good things to happen. You are generating alignment. Example practices: breathwork to align your nervous system to calm or certainty. Mirror affirmations spoken in your future self's tone, not just the words. Embodied movement, walking, stretching, standing in presence with intention. These are short, potent moments where you say to your body, "This is the signal we live in now." You're not hoping to feel better. You're demonstrating your new emotional baseline. 2. Identity embodiment. This is about physical action in the real world that mirrors who you say you are. The behavior itself becomes a vote for the new self. Examples: choosing aligned food that supports your energy, not your comfort. Writing, speaking, or creating something from your avatar's perspective. Saying no to something that the old self would tolerate. Dressing in a way that reflects how you see yourself now, not how you've been seen before. Small shifts, clear reinforcement. When repeated, they begin to train your environment to respond to the new version of you. 3. Reality calibration. This means daily pattern recognition, checking in with yourself and asking, am I acting from my designed identity or from an expired one? This check-in could be done during journaling, as a voice note, while brushing your teeth, right before a decision, as a post-interaction reflection. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is awareness followed by redirection. And here's the real key. These rituals don't need to be long, but they do need to be precise. Generic habits don't anchor identity. Customized micro-practices do. So design your own. Pick one practice for each category. Keep it simple, but make it yours. Let's say your avatar identity is the grounded communicator. Your system might look like this. Frequency activation. 2-minute morning breath, followed by speaking one sentence aloud. My voice is grounded and trusted. Identity embodiment. Sending one message or email per day that expresses clarity with zero self-doubt. Reality calibration. Before each call, asking, am I showing up as the grounded communicator or defaulting to approval seeking? 3 anchors. No complexity. Total alignment. Now why does this matter? Because repetition without ritual becomes mechanical, but ritual with emotion becomes energetic architecture. These practices shift your point of origin. You stop acting from the outside in, reactive, and begin moving from the inside out, intentional. And over time, these micro moments become your emotional muscle memory. Your day becomes saturated with coherence, not because you tried to control everything, but because you began broadcasting from consistency. And in that consistency, your field begins stabilizing. You stop collapsing into fear when tested. You stop reaching for the past when challenged. You stop apologizing for who you've become. Anchoring rituals turn upgrades into your new normal. Now we shift from the internal to the relational, because the next layer of stabilization comes from how others react to your new identity. And not everyone is going to be aligned with who you've become. Your identity is shifting. Your rituals are stabilizing. The loop is running. You're speaking, acting, and moving from a new place. And now something begins to happen. Your relationships respond. Some people lean in. Some drift away. Some challenge you outright. This chapter explains why. Because every person in your life is not just a relationship. They are part of a social quantum entanglement. Here's what that means. Your identity, past or present, has been mirrored, reinforced, and defined by the people closest to you. They know your reactions, your tone, your behaviors, your patterns, your weaknesses, your rhythm. You are a frequency they're used to, so when you change that frequency, they feel it. Whether they understand it consciously or not, they sense the difference, and their system reacts. Some will celebrate it. They'll reflect back the new self you're becoming. These people reinforce your evolution. Others will resist it, not always from malice, often from confusion, fear, or subconscious self-preservation. Why? Because your change threatens their certainty about who you are. They've entangled with the old version of you. They were used to your silence, your caretaking, your self-doubt, your tendency to make space for their dysfunction. Now you're speaking clearly, saying no, holding boundaries, radiating coherence. And coherence makes people holding chaos feel exposed. So they push back. They say, "You've changed. You're acting different. You're being cold. You're so intense lately." And every one of those statements is an opportunity. You can either collapse back into the version they're comfortable with, or you can remain steady and let them recalibrate to your new signal. Let's be clear. You are not responsible for their discomfort. You are only responsible for remaining in integrity with who you've become. Here's how to navigate it. 1. Energetic neutrality. You stop over-explaining. You stop apologizing. You stop needing to be understood. The avatar identity doesn't beg for permission. It radiates consistency. You don't need others to agree, you need to remain aligned. When challenged, respond with calm truth. Yes, I've changed. I'm choosing differently now. This is what alignment looks like for me. Let the discomfort rise. Let it pass. 2. Reinforcement through repetition. Don't shift back just because they push. People adjust to new patterns through repetition. When they see that you consistently operate from this new frequency, their nervous system begins to accept it as the new baseline. That's how the entanglement rewires, but only if you hold the line. 3. Conscious disentanglement. Some people will not adjust. They will resist harder, project more, attempt to guilt, shame, or belittle your transformation. When this happens, you must disengage with compassion, not guilt. The question is not, will they change? The question is this relationship still coherent with who I am? And if the answer is no, you do not need to fight. You simply release the connection or redefine its access to your energy. This isn't cruelty. It's resonance hygiene. Because identity is frequency, and relationships are frequency amplifiers. You don't get to stabilize your new self in a field where the only reflection is who you used to be. Now here's the upside. The more you remain aligned, the more you attract new connections. People who see the real you, who don't need you to be small to feel secure, who are growing themselves and recognize your signal. These are your mirror people, the tribe of your becoming. But they don't arrive until you clear space. And that clearing begins now. Next, we reshape your environment. Not just who surrounds you, but everything you interact with. to reflect your identity at every level. By now, you've seen how people reflect your frequency, supporting or resisting the self you're stabilizing. But it's not just people. Your physical environment is a frequency mirror. Every room you walk into, every object you own, every digital interface you interact with, all of it is either amplifying the identity you're creating or reinforcing the version you've outgrown. This chapter is about the environmental recode, the process of aligning your surroundings to reflect, support, and accelerate your new identity. Let's be direct. If your external world is still designed for your old self, it will slowly pull you back into default. You can meditate all morning, affirm your power, visualize your future. But if your space screams chaos, lack, confusion, or stagnation, your nervous system gets mixed signals. Your brain associates what it sees and feels with who you are. And your subconscious is always listening. So we start here. Audit your space. Stand in the room where you live or work most. Don't fix anything. Just observe. Ask, does this space represent the identity I'm becoming? Does this layout, lighting, or arrangement support clarity or confusion? Is there any object here that I'm only keeping because of guilt, nostalgia, or inertia? If the answers don't feel aligned, that's your work. You're not redecorating for aesthetics. You're recoding for coherence. Begin with removal. Old papers, cluttered surfaces, outdated notes, broken objects. Each one is a silent reinforcement of the past. You don't need to make the space perfect. You need to make it congruent. Then, focus on symbolic installation. This means placing visible anchors in your space that trigger your new identity on sight. Could be a single word taped to your mirror, a framed sentence you speak every morning, a chair that represents your decision state, a scent, a sound, a color, chosen intentionally, not randomly. Every item becomes a frequency node. This way, your space stops being background noise and becomes a collaborator in your transformation. Let's go deeper. Now move into your digital environment. Your phone, your laptop, your online platforms. These are extensions of your nervous system, and most people use them unconsciously. Start with your phone. What do your notifications say about your values? What apps do you reach for when you're avoiding something? What digital clutter are you tolerating in messages, emails, tabs, or feeds? You don't need to go offline. You need to realign. Remove what doesn't match. Curate what supports. Then do the same with your digital rituals. Do you open your inbox before setting your frequency? Do you scroll before activating your signal? These small patterns are massive. They either reinforce distraction or train focus. Your digital world must match the coherence you've been building. Now let's talk about transitional environments, your car, your workspace, your daily commute. These are often ignored, but they're high-frequency touchpoints. What music plays in your car? What tone greets you when you walk into your office? Does your workspace invite expansion or keep you constrained? This isn't about luxury. It's about alignment. Even one subtle shift, lighting a candle before writing, turning off overhead lights during deep focus, creating a no-phone zone around sleep, can tell your system, we're not operating from survival anymore. Each shift becomes a message to your subconscious. And your subconscious responds to repetition, not logic. So the more often your body walks into an environment that reflects the avatar, the faster it accepts that identity as home. And here's what starts to happen. You move more easily. You speak with less friction. You decide without doubt. You rest without guilt. Not because your mindset changed, but because your surroundings stopped pulling you backward. Now here's your challenge. Don't wait for a big life change to upgrade your space. Don't say, when I move, when I get the money, or when things calm down. Start with what's in your control right now. The corner of your desk, the background of your phone, the first sound you hear in the morning, the last thing you see before bed. You're not decorating. You're designing identity containers. And once your environment starts reflecting your frequency, the outside world follows. Next, we'll explore the most fascinating byproduct of stable frequency, reality distortion, when your internal signal becomes so coherent that time, space, and opportunity bend around you. You've upgraded your space. You've aligned your digital world. You've embedded your identity in the physical structures around you. Now something almost surreal begins to happen. The more stable your frequency becomes, the more reality appears to rearrange itself to match you. This isn't coincidence. It's not random. It's a reality distortion field, not a fantasy, but a natural result of identity coherence. Let's break this open. Every person broadcasts a signal, a blend of thoughts, emotions, beliefs, posture, tone, and presence. When that signal is fractured, reality feels resistant. Doors don't open. People misunderstand. Energy leaks. But when your signal is coherent, reality shifts. You walk into a room and people feel something before you speak. You begin speaking and people listen, not because your words are louder, but because your energy is clear. This is the distortion. Reality stops treating you like it treats everyone else. Because your field is calibrated, and coherence is a creative force. Here's how it works. Opportunity doesn't come from effort alone. It comes from perception fields. If your identity says, "I don't belong here," the mind will literally block out information that proves you do. You could be in front of the exact person you need to meet and still not see them. But when your identity says, "This is normal for me," your perception shifts. You notice doors where others see walls. You say yes to things others doubt. You attract synchronicities not by chance, but by signal alignment. This isn't supernatural. It's neurological and energetic. Coherence creates magnetic perception. Let's go deeper. As your field strengthens, people respond differently, often without knowing why. They trust you faster. They offer help without being asked. They assume value without needing credentials. Because their system is reading your signal, and coherence feels like leadership. You become the signal source in any space you occupy. And now, your actions begin bending timelines. Here's what that means. Incoherence slows time. You second-guess. You delay. You backtrack. You repeat patterns. You avoid decisions. But coherence collapses timelines. You act. You respond. You trust. You move. And what once took months, takes days. Not because you're rushing, because you're no longer splitting your energy between multiple identities. All of you is pointed in the same direction. That's identity efficiency. Now let's ground this in practice. To expand your distortion field, you must do 3 things. 1. Maintain signal stability under pressure. This means holding your frequency even when results aren't instant. Not because you fake confidence, but because you've already decided who you are. Stability creates gravitational pull. It bends reality around certainty. 2. Operate as if the identity is fully installed. You stop trying. You stop checking. You stop proving. You act from completion. This doesn't mean perfection. It means internal finality. You're no longer wondering if it's working. You're living as if it already has. 3. Collapse hesitation windows. When an opportunity appears, you don't stall. You act in coherence, even if the evidence isn't clear. The faster you align your behavior with identity, the faster the field responds. Because reality doesn't reward effort, it mirrors identity certainty. Now here's what you'll notice as the distortion field expands. People start saying, "I don't know what it is about you." You get offered things you didn't ask for. You move through rooms with unexpected ease. The pace of synchronicity increases, and none of it feels surprising, because your nervous system is no longer addicted to struggle. It's aligned with inevitability. So when ease shows up, you don't question it. You say, "Of course." And that right there is the shift. You stop interpreting ease as luck and start experiencing it as the byproduct of signal mastery. Now we take this mastery even further. Next, we'll show you how to compress time and accelerate transformation by collapsing the gap between your current self and the version you thought would take years to become. The distortion field has opened. You're beginning to see how reality bends not by force, but through frequency. You've started living as if you're already who you chose to be. Now let's speed it up. This chapter reveals how to collapse the timeline, not metaphorically but literally. Not by skipping steps, but by converging identity and behavior so completely that the delay between decision and manifestation evaporates. Let's get direct. Time is not linear when it comes to identity. You can change your habits without changing your identity, and it will take you months or years to see results. But when you change identity first, when you become the version of yourself who already lives at the next level, your reality begins to rearrange fast. Why? Because you stop fighting your past. You stop dragging the old story. You stop behaving as if transformation is in the future. You make it now. This is identity convergence, the moment where your beliefs, emotions, behaviors, and nervous system all synchronize around the future version of you as if it's already real. The result? Timeline collapse. Let's break it down. Every time you think of change as something you're working toward, you create a gap. That gap becomes time, delay, resistance. But when you behave like it's already done, you compress time. Your choices shift, your speech shifts, your energy sharpens, and life mirrors that precision. So how do you initiate this convergence? First, stop forecasting your identity. No more "when I get there, I hope to be," or "someday I'll feel like." That language delays transformation. From this point forward, you speak as the version of you who already is. Not arrogantly, clearly. You replace, "I'm learning to," "This is how I operate now." "I'm trying to shift." "I've calibrated to this level." "I'll become confident once." "Confidence is my current setting." These phrases aren't lies. They're signals, and repetition makes them real. Next, align micro-decisions to the avatar. Every moment is a choice point. Do you answer that message like your old self, people-pleasing, shrinking, avoiding? Or do you respond like the version of you who commands clarity and respect? Do you scroll to escape or create to expand? Do you delay the task or declare completion? Every aligned decision is a convergence accelerator. Because when your actions match your chosen identity repeatedly and with emotional charge, you override your old timeline completely. Now let's go deeper. To collapse time, you also have to collapse attachments. There's a version of you that's addicted to the struggle. That version is comforted by the idea that change must take time, that transformation is noble only if it's hard. But that belief keeps you slow. To release that timeline, you declare, "I allow transformation to be instant. Not because I'm skipping the work, but because I've already done it." This is not denial. It's recognition that you've already done the unraveling, the reprogramming, the design. Now you give yourself permission to receive the upgrade fully, now without apology. And here's what accelerates everything. Emotion rehearsal. The brain and body do not know the difference between an event that happened and one imagined with emotional intensity. So when you wake up and feel, breathe, speak, and move like the version of you who's already living the reality you've been calling in, you collapse time between now and the outcome. You bring the future to the present by rehearsing the emotional state before the results arrive. That's how you become magnetic. Because the field responds not to hope, but to embodied certainty. And when you broadcast a coherent, congruent frequency of "I am," the gap closes. Timelines bend. People shift. Opportunities open. You move in sync with a reality that previously felt distant, and now responds like it was always waiting. This isn't fantasy. It's physics, repetition, and emotional congruence. And just as new doors begin to appear, new people begin to arrive. Next, we show how those people, perfectly aligned with your frequency, begin to show up without you searching, as your identity becomes your new social magnet. As your identity stabilizes and your signal strengthens, something unexpected begins to unfold. You stop chasing people and they start arriving. Not the people you used to know, but those who seem to see you instantly, hear you accurately, align with you deeply. These are your mirror people, the ones who reflect your new self, not your old wounds. Let's break this phenomenon wide open. Your relationships are never random. They're magnetized by your frequency. That means the version of you you've been until now has attracted people who matched your unconscious patterns. If you were operating from abandonment, you drew people who abandoned. If you were running the fixer script, you attracted those who needed fixing. That wasn't failure. That was alignment with the identity you were broadcasting. But now your frequency has shifted. You've dropped the patterns. You've exited the loops. You've stabilized coherence. And now the field responds. People begin to show up who don't need you to shrink. People who don't confuse power with threat. People who don't project their insecurity onto your growth. Instead, they recognize you, not because you've changed your clothes or got a new circle, but because your core signal is now different. And signal recognizes signal. So what does this look like? You meet someone, and the conversation skips small talk. You feel resonance that isn't about history, but frequency match. There's no need to prove, defend, or explain. You're seen not through memory, but through energetic congruence. These are the relationships that amplify your growth. They don't drain you. They reflect the best of who you've become and invite more of it. So how do you attract these people deliberately? First, stay authentic under pressure. The world will still offer old dynamics, especially when you're expanding. If you default to familiar behaviors, you reinforce familiar connections. But if you hold your new identity, especially in moments of potential people-pleasing or self-minimization, you clear space for mirror people to find you. They can't see you if you're still covered in camouflage. Second, broadcast from clarity. You stop editing your expression to be palatable. You stop hiding your insights to protect fragile egos. You stop toning down your energy so others feel comfortable. Your clarity becomes a signal flare, and those ready to meet it will. Third, be the mirror first. Mirror people aren't just aligned with you, they are attracted by your resonance. So you show up as someone who listens deeply, speaks truthfully, encourages expansion, honors boundaries. You don't wait to be seen. You see others clearly, and that reflection pulls them into coherence with you. Now let's address the discomfort. As new people arrive, old ones may fade. Some will ghost. Others will guilt you. Some will stay physically present but emotionally disengaged. Let them go. Not out of coldness, out of clarity. You're not punishing. You're realigning. And here's what you must understand. The quality of your community is determined by the identity you inhabit. You cannot receive next-level relationships while broadcasting a previous-level self. That's not rejection. That's frequency mismatch. But when your identity locks in, your tribe assembles. Not through strategy, through magnetism. And now, you're no longer the one who adapts. You're the one who holds signal and lets the aligned arrive. From here, the transformation deepens, because even as these new connections form, you must face a final internal resistance. The return of the old self, fighting for relevance just as everything is aligning. And next, you'll learn exactly how to recognize and dissolve this last sabotage pattern before it takes hold. The signal is stable. The new identity is visible. The world is beginning to reflect it back. And just when things are working, the old self reemerges. This is not a glitch. It's not failure. It's the final gate of transformation. This moment, the return of the previous identity, is what we call quantum conflict. It's the internal friction that happens when the nervous system, the subconscious, or the ego attempts to reclaim power. Let's break it down. Your old self wasn't weak. It was deeply practiced. It was built from repetition, survival, childhood agreements, and years of reinforcement. You've disrupted that system intentionally, methodically. But now that you're free from the loop, the parts of you that were attached to it begin to panic. This panic shows up as resistance, sabotage, distraction, or sudden emotional volatility. You might notice, procrastination returns after days of clarity. Doubt appears out of nowhere after a breakthrough. You get physically exhausted for no reason. You seek old validation sources you thought you'd outgrown. That's not regression. That's identity friction. Your old neural networks are lighting up, sensing that their role in your survival is ending. And they're making one last push to stay relevant. This is predictable. It's also critical, because how you respond here determines whether your new identity stabilizes or whether you snap back into the loop you've just exited. Here's the trap. You'll be tempted to explain the sabotage. You'll rationalize it. It's just been a tough day. I'm tired. I lost momentum. Maybe I moved too fast. All of those are lies your old identity uses to get back in the driver's seat. But this time you recognize it. You say, this isn't real. This is resistance. This is the echo of a version of me that no longer runs the show. Let's go deeper. The ego, despite its reputation, isn't evil. It's protective. It was built to defend the self you've now rewritten. So when it feels threatened, it activates. Its tools? Urgency, drama, self-doubt, perfectionism, people-pleasing, overthinking. It's all noise. And your job is not to silence the ego, but to observe it without enrolling in its story. You don't say, I am overwhelmed. You say, there's a pattern here trying to use overwhelm to regain control. You don't say, I messed everything up. You say, this is the old program testing to see if I'll collapse. And then you move forward anyway, because the only way to deactivate an expired identity is to act without its permission. You no longer ask fear if you're allowed. You no longer wait for motivation. You no longer negotiate with patterns you've already outgrown. You say, this is the behavior of my future self. That's the behavior I take now. And you take it while the old program screams. That's quantum conflict resolution. You act aligned not because it feels easy, but because you've decided who's in charge. And the more often you take action in defiance of the old self, the faster those patterns lose power. Because neural energy follows use. What you don't feed dies. Now let's talk about the emotional traps of this phase. There's guilt. Why is this happening again? I thought I was past this. There's fear. What if I never truly changed? There's shame. I'm a fraud. This isn't working. All of these are symptoms of a dying script trying to rewrite itself. And your job is not to debate these emotions. Your job is to return to embodiment. You don't need to feel perfect. You just need to feel present. You don't need to win the mental war. You just need to move forward anyway. Quantum conflict always peaks just before full integration. That's why it feels urgent. Because the ego senses it's about to be demoted from identity architect to background assistant. And when you hold the line, when you refuse to collapse, explain, or delay, something profound happens. The old self doesn't die. It dissolves into neutrality. It stops having emotional leverage. And your identity becomes anchored not in willpower, but in certainty without proof. From this stillness, you unlock the final layer of manifestation. Not thought, not strategy, not action, feeling. Next, we unlock the last identity amplifier, how to feel your future into form faster than thought alone ever could. You've survived the storm of quantum conflict. You've recognized the ego's tactics. You've chosen alignment over emotion. Now you're ready for the final quantum tool. Not a mindset shift, not a new habit, a vibrational upgrade through feeling. This chapter reveals the principle behind one of the most potent forces in your transformation. Identity is vibration, and vibration is emotional frequency made physical. Let's break this open. Thought is electric. Emotion is magnetic. Together, they create the electromagnetic signature that becomes your identity's broadcast. You've mastered the thought part, designing beliefs, collapsing stories, choosing new perspectives. Now you must stabilize the emotional frequency of the future self until it becomes your baseline. Why? Because reality is not responding to what you think. It's responding to the emotion behind what you think. Say you want to feel empowered, but every thought you have about power is coded in anxiety, fear, or urgency. The field doesn't hear your words, feels your charge. So to shift your results, you must shift how you feel about your identity in your body. This isn't about forcing elevated emotions. It's about generating clean frequency, not manufactured positivity, but congruent emotional resonance. Here's how. First, identify the signature of your future self. What emotion does that version of you feel most consistently? Peace? Command? Calm joy? Luminous focus? Name it. This is your core vibration. Now we train your system to feel it without needing a trigger. You don't wait for success to feel empowered. You feel empowered and success begins showing up. This is emotional causality. and you create it through frequency training. Each morning, you generate the feeling of the identity you've chosen. You sit, you breathe, you recall a memory, an image, a sound, or a body sensation that evokes that emotion. You hold it, let it fill your chest, your arms, your voice, your back. You don't explain it, you become it. 5 minutes a day, broadcasting not a thought, but a vibrational identity. That signal enters the field. And as that becomes familiar, it becomes real. Next, you reinforce that feeling in motion. You walk with that frequency. You speak with it. You send messages with that tone. You even pause with it. Because embodiment is more than doing. It's feeling the truth of who you are with no external evidence. And when that frequency becomes dominant, you no longer attract based on strategy, you attract based on coherence. Let's take this deeper. Emotion is how the subconscious understands safety. If your body associates joy with vulnerability, it will block you from feeling it. That's why this work matters. You're not just upgrading your mood. You're rewiring your emotional identity map. You're telling your system, it's safe to feel powerful. It's safe to feel wanted. It's safe to feel free. It's safe to feel calm even when nothing is solved. And every time you feel without needing proof, you collapse time. You show the field, this is who I am now. And the field, always neutral, always listening, begins organizing reality around that broadcast. So here's your new question. What emotional frequency must I feel every day, without permission, apology, or reward, until it becomes who I am? Answer that. Make it a practice. Feel it until your nervous system memorizes it. And then watch what changes, because you're not chasing goals anymore. You're broadcasting identity as vibration, and reality is simply catching up. Now, to complete your personal sovereignty, we move into the one layer still holding unseen power. The hidden parts of you that you've disowned and must now reclaim. You've now learned to feel your identity into form. You're beginning to walk, speak, and resonate as the future self. But there's still a part of the work that's been waiting in the background. A hidden dimension of you that doesn't just need upgrading, it needs reintegration. This is the realm of the shadow, the aspects of self you've disowned, denied, hidden, or suppressed. Not because they were wrong, but because at some point in your past they were unacceptable to others, and so they became unacceptable to you. This chapter is about claiming those pieces back. Not to get rid of them, but to convert the energy of repression into raw personal power. Let's get this straight. Your shadow isn't dangerous. Your shadow is the most potent reservoir of energy in your entire psyche. It holds your power, your fire, your clarity, your edge, your unapologetic self. So why do we bury it? Because we were trained to be good, not whole. From early childhood, we learned that certain traits got us love, while others got us rejection. So what did we do? We split. We presented the version that got approval and pushed the rest into the unconscious. This includes anger if it scared people, ambition if it made others uncomfortable, sensuality if it clashed with upbringing, confidence if it was mistaken for arrogance, even deep creativity if it was seen as impractical. What you repressed became the shadow. But what you repress doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits to be seen, felt, owned. And if you don't integrate it consciously, it leaks out unconsciously, through sabotage, projection, or breakdowns. You can only white-knuckle positivity for so long before the shadow punches through the mask. So let's stop running. Let's do the work, not to shame it, but to reclaim it. Step 1. Spot the trigger. Whatever you judge most harshly in others usually points directly to what you've buried in yourself. If arrogance triggers you, you might have buried your own authority. If neediness annoys you, you might have disowned your own vulnerability. This isn't about blame, it's a map. And your triggers are treasure maps to the parts of you that are demanding your attention. Next, call it out. Write down the traits you hide most. What parts of your expression do you downplay, deny, or distort in front of others? Ask, who would I be if I let that part speak? Then, feel it. Not as a problem, but as power that was never allowed to grow. You don't need to unleash chaos. You just need to stop locking up your range. Because true identity isn't just light. It's wholeness. And if your new self is only built on traits that look good, it's not authentic. It's another mask. Integration means this. You are still kind and you own your rage when it's required. You are still humble and you don't shrink your wisdom. You are still peaceful and you carry the ability to strike if boundaries are crossed. This is not contradiction. This is integration. Your power doesn't come from hiding your shadow. It comes from being able to choose how and when to use the full range of your being. And here's the shift. When you bring the shadow into awareness, it stops running your life from the dark. You no longer sabotage relationships just to prove you're not needy. You no longer overextend just to avoid feeling selfish. You no longer over-apologize for your truth. Because the shadow no longer owns you. You own it. This changes how you walk into rooms. You're no longer performing likability. You're radiating wholeness. People feel it. They don't know why they trust you more, but they do. Because coherence is created not by perfection, but by integration of all parts. So as your new identity stabilizes, don't forget the pieces you left behind. Invite them back, not to run the show, but to fuel the signal you now carry. Next, we explore one of the most liberating realizations on this entire journey, the truth that you were never broken in the first place. Now that you've reclaimed the shadow and begun to operate from wholeness, there's one final illusion to release, perhaps the most persistent and damaging of them all, the belief that you were ever broken. This chapter strips away the myth of self-improvement and reveals the deeper truth. You were never incomplete. You were never faulty. You were never a problem to be fixed. You were simply trained to forget who you already were. Let's challenge everything you've been told about growth. Most personal development begins from a subtle but dangerous premise. Something is wrong with you. Let me help you fix it. But this framing keeps you trapped in a loop of striving, comparing, and endlessly patching up what was never broken. It sells a false idea of transformation, that one day, if you just work hard enough, meditate long enough, discipline yourself deeply enough, you'll finally be enough. But the truth is more radical. You've always been enough. Growth is not about becoming worthy. It's about removing the layers that convinced you weren't. Let's say this clearly. You don't need to be fixed. You need to remember. Remember the self that existed before the conditioning, before the roles, before the trauma, before the masks. That self, your core frequency, never disappeared. It was just covered in noise. Everything you've done in this journey, from collapsing identity to installing rituals, from designing avatars to integrating the shadow, has been about removing interference. Now you're ready to see what's underneath. A self that doesn't hustle for validation. A self that isn't obsessed with comparison. A self that doesn't measure worth by output. A self that doesn't need to prove. You don't need another technique. You don't need another affirmation. You don't need another seminar. What you need is silence, stillness, and the courage to witness your already complete nature. Here's the paradox. The more you let go of needing to get somewhere, the faster your transformation locks in. Because the version of you who is enough doesn't rush. They remember. They speak from clarity. They choose from knowing. They act from alignment, not pressure. And from that energy, everything changes. You don't stop growing, you stop suffering. You don't lose ambition, you lose desperation. You don't stop striving, you stop bleeding energy to feel valid. This is the ultimate reboot, shifting from improvement to remembrance. And when you operate from that place, you are no longer addicted to outcomes. You're not driven by scarcity. You're moved by presence. And ironically, this is when quantum shifts happen faster. Because you're no longer trying to escape yourself. You're simply being the self that was buried under conditioning. You stop asking, how can I fix me? And start asking, what version of me do I want to express next? Now that I know I'm already whole. That's freedom. That's coherence. That's identity sovereignty. So from here, you don't push harder. You play freer. And next, we unlock that next level code, the powerful concept of identity as improvisation, where freedom, creativity, and expansion replace pressure, force, and self-doubt. You've come a long way. From dismantling default identities to calibrating core frequency. You've collapsed timelines, felt your future into form, and integrated your shadow. Now it's time to release the grip entirely. Not by giving up, but by letting it become play. This is quantum play, the shift from performing identity as a survival task to expressing it as an experiment, a performance, a joyful improvisation. Let's break it wide open. Until now, your relationship with identity may have felt intense, necessary, even serious. That's natural. Transformation takes precision. Reprogramming takes commitment. Collapsing false selves takes courage. But when the structure stabilizes, when the frequency holds, it's time to stop trying so hard. Why? Because trying implies effort, strain, seeking, need. And effort, while useful early on, becomes resistance when your identity is already functional. This is where most people stall. They succeed in shifting identity, but continue acting like change is a grind. They carry old effort into new reality, and that friction slows down integration. So what's the solution? You let it be playful. Play doesn't mean casual. It means creative freedom without pressure. Let's take a closer look. Children don't rehearse identity. They perform it. Try it on. Shift it moment to moment. 1 minute they're a superhero. Next, a teacher. Then, a lion. They aren't faking. They're exploring different configurations of power, behavior, and emotion. And each role teaches them something real. You still have that capacity. It's not childish. It's quantum. Because in quantum reality, you aren't one fixed self. You are a field of possibilities. And whichever version you act from consistently, that's who you become. So why not play with the version you want, instead of pressuring yourself to get it right? This is identity as theater, improv, jazz. You're not proving anything. You're performing to discover. Let's make it practical. Take one element of your designed identity. Let's say it's unshakable confidence. Instead of asking, how do I become confident? You ask, if I were an actor hired to play a confident character today, how would I speak, walk, breathe, respond? Then you do that. Not forever. Just for now. Just for this interaction, this meeting, this post, this call. That's not fake. That's rehearsal. And rehearsal becomes reality through repetition. Here's the secret. The nervous system doesn't know if it's real, only if it's repeated. So when you play with identity as if it's a role you can step into without pressure to be perfect, you reduce resistance and increase velocity. You move faster because you've taken off the chains of needing to get it exactly right. Now, people sometimes resist this idea. They say, but I want to be authentic, not fake. That's a misunderstanding. Play is not fake, it's flexible. Fakeness is pretending to be what you're not out of fear. Play is exploring different versions of yourself without shame or rigidity. It's adaptive, alive, dynamic. And guess what? Every version of you that you play with already exists within your quantum field. You're not inventing new traits. You're activating dormant ones. So let's make it a ritual. Each day, ask yourself, what version of me would make this moment more fun, alive, or aligned? Pick a trait, a voice, a style, a rhythm, and try it on like a costume. You don't have to commit forever. You're not redefining your whole self. You're running identity experiments and watching what sticks. This approach makes evolution sustainable because it doesn't require pain to grow. It requires presence. And presence is playful by nature. Now let's talk about momentum. When you stop trying and start playing, your energy frees up. You speak more clearly. You take bolder action. You attract new people. You take more risks. Why? Because there's no identity collapse if the role doesn't go perfectly. You're experimenting, not proving. And that releases the fear of failure. Because failure isn't personal when you're playing. It's feedback. You laugh, adjust, repeat. Now here's a warning. Play is powerful, but only when grounded in inner coherence. This isn't about pretending to be confident while secretly loathing yourself. It's about playing from a stable base, where self-worth is already intact. That's the difference. When your foundation is secure, you can stretch identity freely without cracking it. So you say, I know who I am, and I'll express it however I feel today without apology. That's sovereignty. From there, your entire life becomes a stage, not for performance, but for expression without punishment. And guess what? People respond better, because they feel your ease. They see your lightness. They sense your fluidity. It inspires them to drop their masks too. You become a frequency of freedom, and that frequency is contagious. So now, instead of trying to teach people who you are, you show them how free you are being it. That's leadership, not through authority but through authentic play. And from here, the field opens up again. Why? Because play expands possibility. And possibility is where quantum transformation thrives. So today, loosen your grip. Choose presence over perfection. Try it on instead of figuring it out. Let your identity breathe. Let your character evolve. Let your avatar surprise you. And next, we explore where that freedom can take you, into a version of self that's not just playful, but multidimensional. You've now entered the phase of full flexibility. You've stopped treating your identity as a fixed object and started experiencing it as a fluid construct. One that responds to attention, emotion, and intention. But now it's time to stretch the frame even wider. What if you were never meant to become just oneself? What if identity is not a destination, but a portal? This chapter is your initiation into the multidimensional you, the version of self that cannot be contained by one timeline, one narrative, or one role. Not mystical fluff, not abstract philosophy. This is quantum architecture, practical, living, energetic reality. Let's begin with a truth you've sensed your entire life. You've always been more than one thing. You've felt it in your body, when one part of you wanted to be bold, while another part whispered caution. You've felt it in your career, in your relationships, in your inner monologue. Multiple voices, traits, and desires. And perhaps you've mistaken that diversity for inconsistency. But here's the upgrade. You are not inconsistent. You are multidimensional. You contain multiple identity strands, each with a specific function, gift, frequency, and potential timeline. You are not one person evolving in a straight line. You are a constellation of selves, all existing in quantum possibility. And the version you activate depends on the frequency you embody now. Let's redefine identity again. It is not fixed. It is not linear. It is selectable. Think of your identity as a playlist. Each song is a different version of you. Some songs you've played on repeat, the shy version, the achiever, the doubter, the peacemaker. Others you've only sampled, the creator, the leader, the truth teller, the icon. Most people live their entire lives stuck on one track, convinced that's who they are. But you're about to take control of the playlist. You're going to choose which version plays. Not from fantasy, but from coherence. Let's make it real. There is a version of you that already has what you want. Not metaphorically, literally. In the quantum field, all versions of you exist in parallel. They are real, tangible, accessible, energetic blueprints. This includes the version who speaks clearly and commands attention. The version who easily sets boundaries without guilt. The version who doesn't flinch when receiving abundance. The version who leads from deep inner stillness. The version who has healed the old patterns and now builds from freedom. That version is not far away. It's not behind years of effort. It's just vibrating at a slightly different frequency. And your job is not to build it, your job is to tune to it. That's right. Identity transformation isn't effort-based anymore. It's frequency-based. You stop asking, how do I get there? And start asking, what would it feel like to be that now? Because the field doesn't respond to your thoughts. It responds to your emotional signal. And when your thoughts, emotions, and actions are in harmony, you lock into that version like a radio signal. Let's go deeper. This multidimensional model of identity has 3 layers. Personal selves, every past, present, and possible future self you've personally experienced or imagined. Archetypal selves, collective templates such as the healer, the warrior, the creator, the sage, the rebel, and more. These are shared identity energies that live across cultures and histories. Quantum selves, high-frequency versions of you that exist beyond memory and beyond logic. These are the yous that haven't yet been experienced, but are absolutely real in the energetic realm. You can call any of them forward. How? Through stillness, visualization, rehearsal, emotional resonance, deliberate behavior. You act as if not to pretend but to create a feedback loop. Example, you want to access the creator archetype. You pause, close your eyes, breathe into your body. Imagine the posture, the feeling, the energy of a self that moves ideas into reality with joy and ease. You see how they walk, hear how they speak, feel how they solve problems. Then you mirror them, not to impress, to align. And when you move, speak, and think from that coherence, the field responds. Synchronicities, opportunities, ideas, feedback from others. Your environment starts to shift because your signal is now being taken seriously. This is not magic. It's mechanics. You're not forcing reality to bend. You're simply matching it to the version of you who already lives what you desire. And the most incredible part? The more often you do this, the more natural it becomes. Your nervous system starts adapting. The identity becomes familiar. Eventually, it's not a performance. It's your default signal. Now let's explore something even more radical. Multidimensional identity also includes access to parallel timelines. That means you can communicate with the version of you who made different choices and still holds wisdom you've never used. The you who took the risk. The you who healed earlier. The you who didn't betray themselves to belong. These timelines are alive, and their insights are accessible through intentional tuning. This isn't imagination. This is data retrieval from your own quantum field. Sit down. Close your eyes. Ask a simple question. What does the version of me who already solved this know that I've forgotten? And then feel the answer. Don't analyze. Let the body show you. That's where quantum memory lives, not in thought, but in felt awareness. And that awareness contains codes, specific upgrades to how you think, speak, decide, and act. Now, the more you activate these codes, the more you collapse time. What would have taken months or years to learn now becomes available instantly, because you're not learning, you're accessing. This is what makes the multidimensional model so powerful. It breaks the illusion that growth is linear. You are not climbing a staircase. You're switching tracks, shifting bandwidth, opening portals. And every time you do, you collapse one version and stabilize another. Let's take this even further. Multidimensional identity doesn't just serve you, it serves your impact. When you're able to shift identity with precision and integrity, you become a beacon for others. Because most people are trapped in a single narrative, and you become living proof that we're not fixed. You become an example of emotional agility, role fluidity, energetic freedom, narrative choice, and that gives people permission to free themselves. This is leadership through resonance. Not by having all the answers, but by holding the energy of possibility. You don't need to tell people who they are. You just need to embody what's possible. And they feel it. Now, let's not skip the challenge here. Being multidimensional requires trust. Trust that the version of you who knows what to do already exists. Trust that your nervous system can handle expansion. Trust that your environment will recalibrate when you stop shrinking. And trust that your identity is allowed to change. Not once, but as often as you choose. You are not betraying yourself by changing. You are betraying yourself by staying fixed when your spirit has evolved. So what now? Simple. You start experimenting. Each day you pick a version of you to channel based not on fear but on alignment. You wake up and ask, what would the most aligned version of me do first? What is no longer aligned with my emerging self? What trait do I need to amplify to hold this frequency longer? And then you act accordingly. This is the loop. Choice, frequency, action, evidence, reinforcement. And that loop becomes your new normal. From here, change feels less like effort and more like expression. You're not fixing. You're selecting. You're not forcing. You're tuning. You're not proving. You're expressing. And when that becomes your mode of living, your field transforms. And now that you've opened access to all of you, it's time to understand that growth isn't linear. You've arrived at a high level of integration, but paradoxically, you're now circling back. not backward forward through the spiral. Because every version of self must eventually collapse again, to give rise to the next. Next, we reveal the pattern you've already experienced but never named, the identity collapse loop that repeats across your life, and how to ride it consciously instead of resisting its power. You've just expanded into multidimensionality. You've accessed future selves, ancestral energy, and the full spectrum of your potential across space and time. You've felt the power of selecting identity instead of earning it. But now it's time to face one of the most misunderstood and necessary truths of transformation. Growth isn't linear, it's cyclic, and the pattern that keeps repeating silently, relentlessly, is what we now call the identity collapse loop. Let's get real. No matter how elevated, integrated, or empowered your identity becomes, it will eventually feel too small. Not because you've failed, but because you've evolved. And when expansion hits its edge, your current identity must collapse, so a new one can emerge. It's terrifying. It feels like regression. It looks like breakdown. But in truth, it's a signal that your next level is arriving. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. So what does this loop look like? First, everything's aligned. You're living as the new self. You're coherent, energized. Opportunities are flowing. Conversations feel easy. Your expression is clean. But then, something shifts. You start to feel friction. A familiar voice returns. What if this isn't real? You hesitate where you used to feel certainty. You question your choices. You stall your movement. Then, patterns you thought you healed begin to reappear. You get triggered. You shrink. You second guess. You say things like, I thought I was past this. Or why is this happening again? Welcome to the collapse loop. Let's break it down step by step. 1. The rise. This is when a new identity has been selected and is being reinforced. You've started behaving differently, feeling differently, making new decisions. The world is responding. You feel the thrill of expansion. Everything is clicking. This is where momentum builds. But the energy of transformation always has a half-life, because the moment a new identity becomes your norm, the nervous system begins to look for safety again. And safety is often associated with the familiar. So even when the new identity feels good, your subconscious may begin pulling you back toward the last version of you, the one who had predictable pain, controllable discomfort, and known patterns. You're not regressing, you're hitting the edge of your current container. 2. The edge. Here, things begin to feel tight. The expression that once felt liberating now feels constrained. You say things like, I don't know if this version of me fits anymore. Something about my energy feels old, but I can't see what's next. I'm restless, but I don't know why. This discomfort is not dysfunction. It's expansion pressure. Like a snake shedding its skin, your energetic structure is starting to outgrow the current identity. And what happens next is the collapse. 3. The collapse. This is where most people think they're failing. Old habits resurface. Old emotions show up stronger than expected. Confidence wavers. The vision blurs. You may feel isolated, disconnected, emotionally volatile. But what's actually happening is that the old energetic scaffolding is breaking down. You're experiencing identity death, the dissolution of the pattern that can no longer support who you're becoming. Think of it like this. If you've been living as a version of you that was based on overachievement, and then shift into a version that values ease, the moment you stop performing, all the old voices show up to pull you back. They're not here to trap you. They're here to test the foundation of your new self. This collapse is sacred, because when it breaks, it reveals what's underneath. And what's underneath? Space. Space to listen, reassess, clarify, reinvent. For the void. This is the most important part of the loop, and the one most people rush to escape. The void is not emptiness. It's potential. This is the quantum gap, the liminal space between who you were and who you're becoming. It's where everything and nothing exists at once. But because it's quiet, and undefined, and uncomfortable, people try to fill it with distraction, premature rebuilding, or retreating to the last identity that felt stable. Don't. Stay in the space. Let it do its work. The void is where you access pure signal, no programming, no filters, no performance. It's here that the next version of you begins to form, not from force, but from listening. You might hear a whisper of new values. You might feel a pull toward different environments. You might notice a subtle rejection of old goals. Let it surface. You're not losing yourself. You're watching your future self crystallize. And then comes rebirth. 5. The reconstruction. Now, piece by piece, a new identity begins to form. Not by copying old habits, but by sensing which traits, actions, and beliefs match the version of you trying to emerge. You don't rush it. You feel into it. You speak differently, dress differently, write differently. Your boundaries change. Your standards elevate. And slowly, this version becomes more familiar than the last. You're no longer trying to be someone new. You're simply being who you've now become. That's the loop. Rise, edge, collapse, void, reconstruction. Over and over. Again and again. Each time deeper. More refined. More real. And the better you understand it, the less you fear it. Now let's be clear. The loop doesn't mean you're unstable. It means you're evolving in spirals, not lines. Linear growth says, I'm supposed to always move forward. Quantum growth says, I'm always orbiting deeper truths. In this model, setbacks aren't steps backward. They're returns to old layers, now seen with new eyes. When a trigger reappears, it's not regression. It's re-experiencing from a new altitude. You get to respond differently. You get to choose a new tone. You get to reinforce the identity again, more precisely, more intentionally. Each time through the loop, the collapse becomes less scary because you recognize it. You say, oh, this is the part where it all feels like it's falling apart, so I can build something truer. And just like that, your nervous system learns resilience without clinging. Now, how do you ride the loop consciously? Here are the tools. Label the phase. Are you rising? At the edge? In collapse? In the void? Or rebuilding? Remove shame. Collapse is not failure. Void is not stagnation. Labeling the experience accurately dissolves false guilt. Don't grasp. Don't rebuild the last identity. Don't stuff your schedule. Don't force a plan. Let the field speak. Document. During the void and reconstruction phases, journal often. You'll catch early signals of what your new self values before the mind understands. Anchor new rituals. As your identity reforms, install small anchors, new music, new morning questions, new content inputs to reinforce the signal. Share selectively. Most people will not understand your void. Don't seek validation during identity death. Find those who've walked the loop and can hold space. Expect the next loop. Once this cycle stabilizes, the next one will begin. That's not burnout. That's the evolution spiral. This is your new way of being. You are no longer a person seeking permanent identity. You are a conscious navigator of evolving energetic blueprints. Each loop is not a threat. It's an invitation. And every collapse is actually a release of the structure that cannot hold your next signal. From this lens, life no longer feels random. Every disruption has meaning. Every stuck phase is a refinement. Every identity death is a rebirth into coherence. So let's close this chapter with clarity. You don't need to fear losing yourself, because the only version of you that's dying is the one that already served its purpose. Let it go. Let the next arise. And when it, too, begins to crack, meet the collapse with reverence. Because the loop isn't punishment. The loop is the rhythm of evolution. And you, finally, are attuned to it. You've witnessed the collapse. You've survived the loop. You've rebuilt again, but now from a place of conscious power, not accidental momentum. But this power brings with it a new kind of responsibility, the ability to switch identity modes on command without losing alignment. This chapter is about that power, code switching, the art of shifting identity frequencies fluidly, skillfully, and strategically, based on the context you're navigating. Most people code switch unconsciously. They adjust their tone, behavior, even posture depending on the room they're in, sometimes to survive, sometimes to be liked. But what we're doing here is not about fitting in. This is conscious identity modulation, where you move between archetypes, roles, and versions of self without breaking coherence with your core frequency. It's emotional agility, energetic precision, psychological sovereignty, and it's a requirement if you want to move through multiple worlds, influence diverse audiences, build layered relationships, and hold power without becoming rigid. Let's begin with a truth. You are not just one self. You never were. You are a system of subselves, each holding unique strengths, fears, and codes. Some of these selves are best suited for intimacy, others for leadership, some for deep creation, others for sharp execution. The more you learn to shift between these with grace, the more effective you become across the full spectrum of life. But let's be clear, code switching is not acting. It's not inauthentic. It's alignment through variation. You're not faking. You're flexing. Let's say you're leading a team at work. The version of you that leads may be decisive, assertive, clear. But when you return home, the same frequency may not serve your family. There, the nurturer is needed. Softer tone, slower rhythm, gentler gaze. This doesn't mean you're being someone else. It means your core stays the same, but your expression adapts. Inauthenticity happens when you suppress your truth to be accepted. Fluid identity happens when you express different dimensions of truth, based on what the moment requires. Think of it like a symphony. You are the conductor. The parts of you are instruments. Each context requires a different arrangement, a different lead voice, a different emotional tone. And when you master this, you stop being reactive and start being responsive. Let's break this into 3 phases. Phase 1, mapping your identity library. Before you can switch codes, you must know which ones you have. Most people have 3 to 5 dominant identity modes they shift between automatically. These usually include the performer, energized, expressive, outward-facing; the strategist, analytical, planning, grounded; the healer, soft, empathetic, holding space; the warrior, sharp, protective, assertive; the sage, slow, spacious, guiding; the creator, intuitive, nonlinear, generative; the child, playful, imaginative, boundary light. You've likely accessed all of these at different points. Your job now is to consciously name them. Why? Because when you name a self, you can call it forward with precision. Grab a notebook. Create a page for each identity mode you recognize in yourself. For each one, write when it shows up, what emotions it carries, what its strengths are, what its blind spots are, what environments activate it, what role it plays in your evolution. This exercise alone will awaken an enormous amount of clarity. You'll begin to see how certain environments reward some selves and suppress others. You'll notice how you've overused some modes, while others lie dormant. From there, you gain choice. You can say, today the creator needs to lead. Or, in this meeting, I need the warrior to hold the line. Or, right now, the sage can bring calm. And instead of shifting reactively, you shift intentionally. That's the first level of code switching mastery. Phase 2, installing identity triggers. Once you've mapped your modes, the next step is to create activation anchors. These are deliberate cues that tell your nervous system which version of you to access. Here's how it works. Each self responds to different physical, emotional, and environmental signals. You can train your system to associate certain movements, sounds, or rituals with specific identity states. Example, want to activate the warrior? You might adjust posture, upright, shoulders back. Use a specific breath pattern, short, strong exhale. Play music that evokes fire. Speak in short, clear sentences. Move your body with direct intention. Want to shift into the healer? You could slow your breath, lower vocal tone, create a cozy environment, light a candle or incense, use touch or eye contact differently. Over time, these cues become subconscious switches. With practice, you'll be able to shift modes within seconds, moving from coach to strategist, parent to creator, healer to warrior, not by force but by familiarity. And the more flexible you're switching, the more powerful your presence becomes. Why? Because people will feel your coherence in every mode. They'll sense that no matter what face you wear, the frequency beneath it is intact. You are not changing who you are expressing more of what you are on purpose. This is identity fluency. Now let's go to the highest level. Phase 3, maintaining core frequency while switching. The final level of code switching is fluidity without fracture. This is the art of expressing many versions of yourself without losing the center. This only becomes possible when you've done the deeper work, collapsed the false identities, integrated the shadow, calibrated to your core frequency, felt your future self into the body, aligned your inner emotional reality with outer behavior. Once your system is no longer performing identity, but radiating it, you can shift expression without shifting essence. People with fractured identity tend to lose themselves in each mode. They adapt so heavily that they forget who they are. This leads to burnout, emotional dissonance, identity confusion, chronic people-pleasing, resentment, energy loss. But those who've stabilized coherence can shift fully and return to center just as fast. They can be fierce in a boardroom, tender in a breakup, visionary in a brainstorm, and grounded in a crisis, and feel more whole, not less. This is energetic maturity. It's what allows you to move across industries, cultures, circles, and moments without becoming brittle, false, or overextended. You become identity fluid and energetically sovereign. Let's make it practical again. Next time you're about to enter a situation, pause. Ask yourself, which version of me will bring the most value here? What mode of self has the resources to respond best? How can I express that part of me without abandoning my core frequency? Then breathe, trigger the mode, move forward, and afterward return. Close the loop by asking, did that mode serve me well? Did I override my truth? What needs to integrate from that experience? This reflection ensures your fluidity doesn't become fragmentation. You stay whole even as you shift. You've now entered the realm of complete expression. You are not one fixed being. You are a curated orchestra of selves. Your task is not to choose one forever. It's to know each intimately and lead them with purpose. And next, we'll amplify that expression even more by injecting archetypal energy not just from within, but from the mythic field around you. Because once you master your own codes, you're ready to download legendary ones. You've just mastered the art of code switching, the ability to move between identity expressions while maintaining your energetic core. That gave you freedom, precision, adaptability. But now we go one layer deeper, because your personal identity isn't the limit. There are greater forces in the field, universal energies, timeless characters, collective blueprints that you can consciously access and inject into your current self. This is archetype injection, the strategic downloading of mythic-level traits into your identity to amplify specific attributes and accelerate transformation. Let's begin with a question. Why do some traits feel impossible to access? Until you watch a film, hear a story, or read a legend that stirs something ancient inside you. That jolt of energy isn't inspiration. It's recognition, because archetypes are not fictional. They're real energetic patterns. They're embedded in human consciousness, and they've been living in your system dormant until activated. When you feel the fire of the warrior watching a battle scene, or the grace of the healer reading a redemption story, or the wild genius of the creator hearing an artist speak, you're not observing something outside of you. You're waking up something ancient within you. That's the essence of this chapter. To awaken what's already coded into your energetic DNA, and to bring it into play with intention. Because personal identity can only get you so far. You've done the trauma work, the inner child work, the code switching. You've collapsed false selves and crafted new ones. But to lead at the next level, to influence, to transmit, to architect culture, you must pull energy from a larger field. You need archetypal power. Let's define it clearly. What is an archetype? An archetype is a universal identity pattern, a recurring blueprint of behavior, energy, and essence that transcends culture, time, and personal experience. Think of them as primordial roles that humans have always resonated with. The warrior, the king/queen, the rebel, the healer, the creator, the sage. the lover, the magician, the ruler, the innocent, the trickster, the seeker. Each archetype carries its own values, fears, strengths, shadows, language patterns, energy fields, behavioral templates. And when you inject these consciously, you get identity upgrades that aren't limited by your personal history. This is not performance. This is transmission. Let's break it down. Step 1. Identify the gap. Start by asking, what's the trait or energy I can't seem to access? No matter how much personal work I do, maybe you're stuck in indecision. You don't need more strategy, you need the ruler archetype to come online. Maybe you keep pleasing others. You don't need more journaling, you need the warrior. Maybe your creativity feels frozen. You don't need more rest, you need the creator to reawaken. Get honest about where you're underpowered. That's where an archetype can fill the void. This isn't bypassing, it's borrowing. You're not faking the energy. You're accessing a blueprint that's already hardwired into the human experience. Step 2. Select the archetype. Choose one. Don't overthink it. Pick the one whose energy would solve your current problem, open your next opportunity, or upgrade your emotional field. Let's say it's the warrior. Once you choose, it's time to inject. Step 3. Embody through ritual. You now need to signal to your nervous system, I am stepping into the field of this archetype. That means changing posture, breathing pattern, clothing, tone of voice, movement style, input, music, imagery, language, decision cadence. Example, warrior activation. Stand tall, wide stance. Breathe from your belly, sharp exhale. Visualize a battlefield. Use short, powerful language. Now, clear, direct. Move. Play soundtracks that evoke force and precision. Speak with deliberate pacing. Commit to a single decision with no waver. What's happening here? You're using physical and sensory cues to install an energetic mode. And your subconscious, which cannot distinguish between memory and imagination, begins to accept it as your real identity. Do this often enough and it sticks. You're not pretending to be a warrior. You've merged with it. That's archetype injection. And it works with any mode. Need to soften after battle? Shift to the healer. Loosen the jaw. Breathe gently. Light a candle. Use words like I see, I feel, I honor. Slow your movements. Focus on presence, not performance. That's integration, not escape. Step 4. Rotate as needed. One of the gifts of archetypal fluency is that you're never stuck. You don't collapse when your main self feels overwhelmed. You simply access another one. If the leader is tired, bring in the sage. If the sage is too abstract, switch to the strategist. If the strategist feels cold, return to the lover. It's dynamic, responsive, empowering. And unlike personal identity work, which can be dense and slow, archetype injection is instantaneous. Because you're not healing trauma. You're activating power. They're not the same. Both are sacred, but they serve different layers. You've done the deep clearing. Now it's time to inject frequency. Let's bring it into real life. Say you're about to pitch your idea in a high-stakes meeting. Your personal self might carry anxiety, imposter syndrome, nervousness. Do you need to go excavate your childhood again? No. You need to inject the king. The king archetype doesn't over-explain, doesn't beg, doesn't shrink. He transmits certainty. So before the call, you activate. Dress for power. Straighten spine. Speak 3 sentences aloud in your king voice. Visualize people responding with respect. Walk into the space with zero hesitation. You're not manipulating reality. You're broadcasting a new signal. And guess what? People mirror it. They don't respond to who you are. They respond to what you transmit. And when that transmission is rooted in archetypal truth, it cuts through noise, confusion, and even their doubt. Now, don't confuse this with ego. Archetype injection is not about feeling superior. It's about becoming more whole. The parts of you that were dormant, the king, the warrior, the mystic, the wild woman, they don't cancel out your core self. They complete it. You are not building a character. You are activating the library of power encoded in your DNA. passed down through story, symbol, and myth. And from that place, you lead differently, you create differently, you relate differently, you decide differently, you stop asking for permission, you start transmitting authority, not forceful but unmistakable. And that frequency, that signature blend of your personal self infused with mythic energy, that's what makes people stop, listen, trust, follow, and act. Because they don't just see you, they feel the field behind you. And next, you'll understand exactly how that field powers your future. Because it's not fate that shapes your path. It's the engine you didn't know you were driving all along, identity itself. You've wielded archetypal energy. You've activated mythic power. You've learned to code switch, shift frequency, embody different modes, and become the master conductor of your own inner orchestra. But now it's time to look at the mechanism that's been running the entire show, often unseen, almost always underestimated. It's not your goals, not your vision board, not your affirmations, not your to-do list. It's your identity, because identity is the invisible engine that drives everything. Choices, actions, results, relationships, opportunities, patterns, limits, and expansion. It's not just a story you tell yourself. It's the code that determines what you allow, what you expect, what you seek, and what you unconsciously reject. And unless it's recalibrated, no matter how much you try to improve your life, you'll always circle back to the identity that's running underneath. Let's break this open. Every result you're experiencing right now, in health, wealth, relationships, creativity, fulfillment, is being filtered through one thing: the version of you that you believe is real. Identity is the blueprint your nervous system uses to answer. What is safe for me? What is possible for me? What kind of success is allowed for someone like me? How much love, visibility, or power can I hold before I sabotage it? Who must I become to stay accepted? You might think you're taking actions consciously, but the truth is you're acting in alignment with the identity running beneath awareness. And that identity, unless rewritten, acts like an energetic thermostat. You can raise your standards temporarily. You can get bursts of clarity, motivation, or breakthrough. But if your identity hasn't caught up to your goals, you'll crash right back to your previous reality. Because the identity engine always brings you back to what feels like home, even if home is underfunctioning, overgiving, doubting, or staying small. Now, here's what most people miss. Identity isn't just who you think you are. It's who you are afraid to stop being. That's the grip, the self-image you unconsciously protect, even when it hurts, because letting go of it would mean facing the unknown. And that's why surface-level change rarely sticks. You can change your schedule, your branding, your diet, your pricing, your location. But if you don't change who you are being, none of it lasts. Because your system will always fight to return to the familiar signal. Let's take an example. Let's say your current identity is, I'm someone who works hard but stays under the radar. You might consciously want visibility. You might hire a coach, build a platform, launch a program. But if the core identity hasn't shifted, here's what happens. You procrastinate on posting. You underprice your offer. You downplay your success. You sabotage big opportunities. You over-explain your decisions. You burn out trying to prove your value. Not because you're lazy or confused, but because your identity engine is rejecting the new input. The version of you that lives in the spotlight doesn't match the one who's running the controls. So what does it do? It shuts it all down. Not to punish you, to protect you. Because in your nervous system's current map, being seen equals risk. Until you change the identity, you can't hold the result. And that's why people repeat the same cycles for years. Not because they lack potential, but because they never upgraded the engine. So let's make this practical. Step 1. Identify your default identity script. Start with this question. What do I believe is true about me, even when I don't want it to be? This might sound like, I always have to try harder than others. I'm not wired for wealth. I'm the one who helps, not receives. I get close to success, but it never lasts. I'm smart, but not confident. I'm creative, but inconsistent. People like me, but don't choose me. These are identity loops, the repetitive frequencies that run under your behaviors. Now ask, what does that version of me automatically do and avoid every day? You'll start to see the rules, the patterns, the reflexes, all of it tied back to a single engine, who you believe you are. Step 2, trace the origin. Where did this identity come from? Was it modeled by your parents? Was it reinforced through school, culture, or religion? Was it a response to trauma or loss? Was it formed to keep you safe, liked, or useful? This is not to blame, it's to locate the point where identity froze into a shape that no longer fits. Once you see the origin, you stop personalizing the pattern. You realize, this isn't who I am, it's who I learned to be. And that recognition creates space to choose again. Step 3, design the new engine. Now ask, if I were already the version of me who lives my next level reality, what would my identity code be? Describe them, not in vague affirmations, but in behavioral signals. How do they speak? What do they expect? What do they tolerate? How do they spend time? What do they never explain? How do they process doubt or fear? What is their emotional home base? Write it out like a user manual. Get specific. That is your new engine. Now your job is simple. Step 4. Begin broadcasting the new identity before the results arrive. You do not wait for proof. You do not wait for external validation. You do not negotiate with your past. You install the new identity first, through action, language, energy, and pattern. This means saying no faster, sharing your truth sooner, holding the boundary longer, choosing differently in familiar situations, trusting the signal even when your past self panics. It's uncomfortable because your nervous system is detoxing the old engine. But each time you respond from the new identity, you create energetic evidence. Your field starts to shift. People treat you differently. Opportunities recalibrate. Resistance starts to fade. Not because the world changed, but because your broadcast changed. And when that signal becomes your default, the identity engine locks in. You no longer have to stay motivated. You no longer need constant reminders, because you're not efforting into a new life. You're living from the identity that already holds it. From here, everything accelerates. You make cleaner choices. You attract matching frequencies. You notice misalignment faster. You stop tolerating contradiction. And most importantly, you stop confusing effort with effectiveness. Because you realize it was never about how hard you worked. It was always about who you were being while doing it. That's the truth. Identity isn't just the story of you. It's the engine of everything. And now that engine is yours to control. You've pulled the curtain back. You've met the driver behind every pattern. And now you're ready to move from a life of unconscious creation to a legacy of deliberate transmission. So what happens when your identity becomes bigger than you? Next, we design the self that outlives the body. The identity that echoes beyond your timeline and into others. You've seen behind the curtain. You've met the engine. You now understand that identity isn't just who you are in this moment. It's what shapes your entire trajectory. But today, we go beyond your present timeline. Beyond your lifetime. We begin shaping the version of you that doesn't just influence your current path, but leaves a signal behind. This is quantum legacy. The art of designing an identity that outlives your body, your career, your memories, even your name. Because while most people chase success that ends when they do, you're now ready to transmit an identity that echoes across generations. Let's start with the truth. You will be forgotten. Your name, your photos, your social media, your accolades. Most of them will vanish. But your frequency, your impact, your imprint, that lives on. Legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about what remains because you existed. And the mechanism that transmits legacy isn't money, content, or fame. It's identity, lived in such coherence, such clarity, and such conviction that it becomes contagious. Let's break this open. Most people think of legacy as something they'll deal with later, in old age, retirement, or the final chapter of their life. But you're different now, because you understand that legacy doesn't begin when you die. It begins the moment your identity becomes intentional. Every time you choose who you're being, not for approval but for alignment, you begin transmitting legacy frequency. Every time you speak truth over comfort. Live congruence over convenience. Act from future alignment rather than past programming. You encode your identity into others. That's legacy. It's not carved in stone. It's etched into nervous systems, family dynamics, business cultures, friendships, communities. You've felt it before, when someone spoke with so much clarity that it changed how you saw yourself. That's identity transmission. And now, you become the transmitter. So let's make this real. Step 1. Define the identity that's worth leaving behind. Ask yourself, what parts of me deserve to be passed on, even when I'm no longer here to explain them? This isn't about perfection. It's about coherence. Maybe it's your truth-telling, your audacity, your compassion, your intellectual rigor, your emotional generosity, your refusal to shrink, your art, your clarity, your devotion, your imagination. Whatever it is, name it. This becomes your legacy signature, the energetic traits you commit to amplifying not just for your benefit, but so they can ripple beyond you. You're not building a brand. You're curating a frequency worth inheriting. And the only way to do that is to live it fully right now. Step 2. Embody it publicly. Legacy identity isn't a private practice. It's lived out loud. Because legacy transmission requires exposure not to fame but to others' nervous systems. This means saying the hard truth not just in theory, but in your conversations. Modeling boundaries even when it costs you popularity. Creating work that expresses your real voice, not what's marketable. Teaching what you know even if one person listens. Loving from fullness, not from attachment. Living your design, not your survival mask. You are building an identity that is felt, not just seen. You become an energetic landmark for those around you. A fixed point of coherence in a chaotic world. That's what leaves the imprint. Not what you teach. Not what you post. What you embody when no one's watching. Because the people closest to you, they'll remember how you showed up, not what you said. And the people who never met you, they'll feel your energy through the lives you touched. The ones who began living differently because you did. Step 3. Translate identity into systems. Now take it further. Legacy becomes immortal when it's embedded into systems, repeatable structures that carry your values without needing your presence. This could look like a book that transmits your philosophy, a framework others can apply, a company culture that continues your leadership code, a mentorship style that echoes into future generations, a set of principles you raise your children with, a ritual your family continues, a philosophy you teach your community. These are not achievements. They are containers for identity. You are designing mechanisms that let your frequency keep moving long after your name fades. This is quantum leadership. You don't just build products, teams, or brands. You build identities that replicate themselves through behavior, energy, and decision-making. And when that happens, you're no longer the center. You're the signal. You've become legacy in motion. Step 4. Let the old versions die. Here's the paradox. You can't leave a quantum legacy while clinging to outdated identities. That means some parts of you, even the admirable ones, must die. The overachiever, the people-pleaser, the self-sacrificer, the perfectionist, the one who never asked for help, the one who played small to be liked, the one who explained everything, the one who led with pain instead of presence. These parts might have helped you survive, but they are not the identity that leaves impact. They must go, because legacy is transmitted through clarity, not complexity. And every outdated layer adds noise. Let them go. Strip the signal down to what is true, clean, and unshakable. Then amplify it. Step 5. Accept that you are already a legacy now. The most powerful shift you can make is this. Stop waiting to become impactful. Start recognizing that you already are. Someone is watching you. Someone is absorbing your frequency. Someone is calibrating to your tone, your decisions, your courage, your integrity. Legacy is not a distant event. It's happening every time you show up aligned. So ask yourself, Am I acting like the version of me I want to be remembered for? Am I transmitting something worth inheriting? Am I editing myself to survive? Or expressing myself to liberate others? Because the truth is, every action is a vote. Not just for who you are, but for the kind of reality you help create. And the only difference between accidental influence and intentional legacy is awareness. Now that you see it, you can choose. You can ask, what frequency do I want to remain in the field after I'm gone? And then live as that frequency now. Speak it, design with it, move from it, create from it, and let the rest fall away. You're not chasing immortality. You're building resonance. You're not building a monument. You're crafting a memory field. One that continues to move people, shift patterns, and inspire clarity long after you've left the room. That's quantum legacy. And the clearer your identity becomes, the further that legacy travels. Next, you'll face the final paradox. If identity is everything, what happens when you finally release even that? Prepare to meet the self that exists beyond identity itself. You've crafted a legacy. You've shaped a frequency that outlives your form. You've turned identity into your most potent tool. And now there's only one place left to go. Beyond identity. Everything up until now has been about constructing, refining, upgrading, and embodying powerful identities, true ones, aligned ones, coherent ones. But now it's time to meet the one who exists beneath every identity you've ever worn. The self that watches. The self that remains. The self that doesn't need a story, a label, a name, or even a purpose to simply be. Because as much power as identity carries, there is an even deeper liberation that begins the moment you let go of needing to be anyone at all. Let's start with a truth you might feel in your bones. Even your most empowered identity is still a role. Even your most conscious avatar is still a projection. Even your most aligned frequency is still a choice filtered through conditions, sensations, and experience. So who are you without it? Who are you when there is nothing to optimize, nothing to prove, nothing to heal, nothing to become, nothing to transmit? Most people will never go here because it's terrifying to remove the costume, even when it's a costume you love. You've spent a lifetime editing, curating, building a sense of self. And now you're being invited to step beyond all of it and enter the field of pure being. This isn't a negation of what you've built. It's the deepest kind of respect for it. Because once you've held every version of you, from the traumatized child to the conscious architect to the mythic avatar, there is only one final awareness to unlock. You are the one watching all of it. You are the observer. You are the space, not the form. Let's slow this down. At first, identity is unconscious. You are your patterns. Then it becomes intentional. You shape your signal. But eventually you realize every identity, no matter how refined, is still a form of limitation. It defines the field. It gives edges to the infinite. It filters the raw signal of awareness into something the world can see. And that's necessary for creation, for leadership, for change. But if you confuse the tool with the truth, you lose yourself in the performance. Even the elevated one, even the healed one. The moment you attach to it as you, suffering begins. Because all identities eventually dissolve. They must. And when you grip them too tightly, you collapse into fear, confusion, contraction. But when you can let them go without losing yourself, you access the deepest freedom available. You are not your identity. You are the awareness in which identity arises. You are not the thought. You are the space in which the thought moves. You are not the feeling. You are the consciousness that experiences it. You are not the frequency. You are the field in which frequency modulates. And when this realization lands, not just intellectually but viscerally, you become untouchable. Not invincible, but free. Because now you can wear any identity without needing it to be you. You can shift roles, speak new codes, design entire realities, and still return to the silent witness at the center of all movement. And in that silence, you find peace. Because peace doesn't come from controlling identity. It comes from knowing that you are not dependent on it. Let's make it real. Close your eyes for a moment. Feel into the person you think you are right now with all your beliefs, habits, memories, values, fears, preferences. Now ask, if all of that vanished, would I still exist? Feel it. If your name was erased, would there still be something here? If your memories were deleted, would something remain? If your roles disappeared, would there still be awareness? Yes, that awareness, the one that cannot be described, labeled, measured, or judged. That's the real you. It's not an idea. It's not a personality. It's not even a frequency. It's pure consciousness. That's the self beyond identity. And it's always been here, watching, waiting, witnessing all your iterations, not judging, not rushing, not clinging, just observing. This is the self that never changed. The one that was present when you were 5, when you were 15, when you fell in love, when you failed, when you rebuilt. It was always watching, always still. And the more you rest into that self, the less suffering touches you. Because you stop needing to prove your worth. You stop needing your identity to be accepted. You stop reacting to people who don't see you. Because none of that touches the one who watches. This is not a bypass. This is the bedrock. From here, every identity becomes a choice, not a chain. You can be fierce and return to stillness. You can be bold and remember your silence. You can be expressive and feel the observer within. And from here, every moment becomes a game, not a performance, but a creative experiment. Because you no longer think, this is who I am. You now know, this is who I'm playing for now. And when the scene changes, you change with it, without fear, without loss, without contraction. Because identity is no longer your anchor. Awareness is, and from that place you become the most powerful creator on the planet. Because your power is no longer tied to any mask. It flows from the stillness behind all movement. You've now walked the full circle, from unconscious identity, to designed identity, to legacy identity, to no identity, and in that release you've arrived, not at an end, but at the eternal center that was always here. You are not your story. You are not your trauma. You are not your archetype. You are not your avatar. You are not even your healed self. You are the field in which all of it arises, moves, transforms, and fades. And when you live from that field, every part of life becomes sacred. Every breath becomes enough. Every identity becomes art. Now we prepare for the final sequence. It's time to gather everything. Every self you've lived, shed, crafted, healed, and remembered, and bring them into one singular force. Because coherence is not about becoming one thing. It's about aligning all things into a unified signal. And that, finally, is where we go next. To the final integration, the final reboot, the moment where all selves become one.